Good evening, Dr. Sam Christian. It's the 27th of October, 2021, and we are interviewing you from the home of your sister, Esther Christian, and your mother, Alberta Christian, at Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And I'm in Upper Marlboro as well, and I just wanted to thank you again for agreeing to do this interview. I think it's very important now as we approach our golden years that we reflect on the life we've lived, and we do so in a manner that is instructive and that allows for our heritage as a people in Dominica and the Dominican diaspora to be memorialized. Memorialized in a way that those who come from the period after us will be able to have some sort of foundational basis to understand who it is we were, what it is we did, how it is we're able to achieve, and hopefully that can provide some guidance to them in how people from a small island were able to do much with limited resources. It reminds me of a story that I always hear retold by many, or stories I always hear retold by many people of when rather large families in Dominica would have one tin of sardine and one tin of corned beef and have 7 mouths or 8 or 9 mouths to feed. And how did our parents manage that sort of home economics? So they did it. And we're here as testimony to the success of their efforts. So having said that, Sam, good evening to you. And tell me, Sam, you give us your full name, when were you born and where were you born?
Thank you, Gabe, my baby brother. Samuel Joseph Christian, born in 1956 in Newtown, Dominica.
Indeed. And who are your parents?
Alberta and Wendell Christian. Alberta near John Baptist from St. Joseph, and Wendell Christian from Delices.
Yeah, we say Delices, sometimes some people say Delices. And at that time, if you know, or if you found out later, what did your father do? What was his background?
Well, of course, he was in the Caribbean forces of the British Army in World War II, returned from St. Lucia, Castries, where he underwent training, and served in Hillsborough. In what capacity exactly, you're being the family historian, but that's where he worked, and he would ride to St. Joseph, and that's where he met Mom.
Well, the story there are two pieces to the Hillsborough story. One is that he was a soil conservation officer in the Layou Valley under Chief Forestry Officer Bora, an Englishman. And that's when he met our mother in the Layou Valley. But he also worked as a clerk at the Hillsborough Estate, which is also in the Layou Valley. For some time. I think he did that subsequent to being a soil conservation officer, basically instructing farmers on how to plant bamboo along the sides of the valley to hold the soil. So he was engaged in soil conservation because the valley, of course, is precipitous. And later on in the 1970s, there was a huge landslide. So the British, they had a keen sense of the issues in that valley, the soil quality and the like, which formed the Miracle Lake. But I'm going ahead too far now. And of course, he met our mother, who was born in the Layou Valley as well. And subsequent to that, he became a fire officer after being a police officer for some time.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. So, and of course, when he was a fire officer, it's unclear as to when that accident happened, but he was riding at the back of the large ambulance when it turned over, I think responding to a bushfire or false call, whatever the case was.
1963.
Yes.
It happened in 1963.
Yes. You tell it like you were there, but you are the gatherer of the facts. You would have been about 3 years old at that time.
Sal, let me tell you what happened. I always heard of the accident, but I did not know when it took place until we were doing the research into death by fire, the explosive story of the 1963 cannibal tragedy, which took place in February 1963. So when reviewing the newspapers from the archives on that period, I stumbled upon the article on the fire truck that overturned that Newtown.
So he went up in the air and fell on his head, split his helmet open, and was in the hospital, and was visited, had a distinguished visitor, didn't he?
Well, the story that mother gives is that J.C. Joseph who was not then yet a shopkeeper, came and said, "There's been an accident with your husband." And as for him, he died. He died on the spot. And that's what she said to my mother. Our mother said she only felt she grew wings and flew to the hospital as if on wings. But he was visited by a policeman by the name of Desmond Blanchard, who later became commissioner of police. And I think that he said to him, "You know, I'm suffering from shock. I'm suffering from shock." And the doctor said, "Give him plenty APC." What is that, Sam? What is APC?
Okay, well, that's I think that's the abbreviation for Tylenol with codeine. I'm not sure exactly, actually.
Yes. So that happened about 7 years after you were born. So in 1963, you would have been about 7 years old.
That's right.
All right. Yes, sir. So
then there was another vehicle accident in early age. You were following me when I was going to get water. We had to carry a couple buckets of water before going to school. And I was not sure that you were following me. And then I heard a thud. And I saw you flying past me at about waist height, like a rag doll. And well, I saw the body, the child flying past, and the screech of the tires. And I dropped my bucket of water and ran to the body, but you were snatched up by fishermen and rushed into the sea there in Pottersville and dunked in the water. And well, you've gathered the rest of the story. You survived.
The fisherman's name was James. And I remember him saying, I remember it vividly. It's funny how life is. I don't remember being with you. I don't remember the accident. I mean, being hit rather, but I remember waking up in the water and the fisherman was asking me, "Have you seen," well, he didn't say, "Have you seen God?" like some Englishmen said. He spoke in the vernacular. He said, "You see God, you see God?" And of course, I was taken to the hospital. How, I do not know. But I was hit by Clarence Signoret, who was then a senior civil servant. Later on, he became cabinet secretary in the colonial government, and in the government of a newly independent Dominica. And he became, I think, the second president of the Commonwealth, the second or third president. I think the first president was fourth president. The first president was Fred de Gazor, who ran away during the uprising of 79. The second president for a brief moment was Louis Cours-Latigue. Well, strike that. Louis Cours-Latigue became the first president only for a while. When he became governor, he was president for a brief moment. Fred de Gazor took over. During the uprising, Fred de Gazor left Dominica. Louis Cours-Latigue was appointed by Patrick John for a brief moment. He was stormed out of office after 24 hours. Then after that, Jenna Armour became president. So that's Latigue, de Gazor, Armour, and then in the election of 1980, Eugenia Charles came in, and I believe Augustus Marie, a magistrate from Portsmouth, became the president. And I think the fifth president would have been Sir Clarence Signoret.
It was a hit-and-run accident, wasn't it?
Well, I think he stopped, and I believe that policeman Lawrence came on the scene, and I was told that Lawrence told him he could leave, and our mother and father went to get the legal help from Eugenia Charles. And mother was heard to have said to us later that Eugenia Charles said, you know, why do you keep your children running in the street? Something rather maybe, you know, nonchalant and unkind, but word is that
I'm interviewing you. Huh?
That's okay. Clarence Signoret basically had visited every lawyer in the small town of Roseau, and no lawyer would take the case. And so there was never any compensation, but I survived. I think I have a mark on my head from it. And there's a story to that. In 1984, I returned from Washington, where I was attending the University of the District of Columbia Business College. And Ma, Alberta Christian, my mother, brought me to a event at the governor's house, which is now the president's house, a reception. And Mr. Signoret was president. And I came upon him in the receiving line, and I said to him, "Do you know who I am?" He said, "No." I said, "I'm Gabriel Christian. You struck me down as a child." And his wife, who was quite startled, said, no, it wasn't him. I said, "Ma'am, you don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, good to see you." And I walked along. And later on, his aide-de-camp, Nicholas George, years later, called me to say that he was ill. Could I get him into Walter Reed Army Hospital in DC, off near where we lived, Georgia Avenue in Northwest Washington. but he died before I could do anything. So life is a very interesting process.
It is. So those were among the issues of my childhood. Then,
Tell us who your siblings were at that time.
Yes, of course. The first Crystalline was mentally challenged, and she was our angel because we all learned to take care of her. She later developed seizure disorders, and sometimes she loved dolls, and she would, wherever she saw a doll, when she was walking to work or in town with my mom, she would go and commandeer the doll, and then we'd have to go and try to talk to her. Oftentimes it would take half an hour or more of coaxing her to purchase the doll. So that was Crystalline, and Crystalline accompanied my mom, our mom, at the workshop for the blind, and she subsequently succumbed to several years ago, a few years ago, 10 years ago. And then, of course, Wellsworth, or brother, or eldest brother.
She succumbed to pancreatic cancer.
That is correct. Became the first local vet, went to the St. Mary's Academy. I was a cadet, was a member of the St. Alphonsus Youth Group, and got a Commonwealth Scholarship to study in India. And there he, turning off this phone, there's trying to beep. And, came back as the first Dominican-born veterinary doctor. And he worked through his, he had a pulmonary, breathing condition, ended up requiring a lung transplantation, which was authorized and facilitated by Prime Minister Eugenia Charles. But just before that could happen, he expired. But he served very well in Dominica, the Ministry of Agriculture. In fact, one of his understudies was Colin McIntyre, who later became a leading member of the current government. And then Lawson is a civil engineer in Hampstead, studied in England. And Lawson is an avid cricketer and a very strong proponent of the gospel, of whom I followed after the Mount Prospect accident. We both had conversion experiences. Lawson is now practicing civil engineering in Hampstead, New York. Then I'm the middle child, number 4, Gabriel, yours truly here, and also the 2 sisters, younger sisters, Esther, who is taking care of our mom right now, and I am ably assisting her, I believe. And our younger sister, Esther, is an accountant, and Esther worked with Anthem and several other entities, did organizational behavior and did great work, and now has committed herself to taking care of our mom. Our younger sister, Teresa, did environmental science, and she's an environmental analyst. I remember in college, she would be on a fishing trawler out there in Maine, the Gulf of Maine, the Gulf of Mexico. And I was wondering, oh my God, my little baby sister that I saw in 1967 when I ran up to the maternity ward and couldn't gain entrance because I was just 11 at the time. And but mom showed me her in the window. And so there she was, and she's done a stellar job. Climate change and the environment are huge concerns right now. So she is doing the very best she can, dealing with some health challenges, but wonderful baby sister.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam, for that recitation. So Crystalline the first was born with a disability. She was developmentally disabled, died in 2011. Dr. Wellsworth Christian, our oldest brother, passed away in the same year. Well, in 1990, I'm sorry. He died in 1990. And our father passed away in 2011. He died October 7th of 2011. Crystalline died December 3rd, 2011. Both of them passed away in the state of Maryland, died at Doctor's Hospital in Lanham, and Crystalline at Anne Arundel Medical Center in Annapolis, Maryland. But Dr. Christian died here in Upper Marlboro while awaiting a heart-lung transplant on June 9th, 1990, my last year at Georgetown. And of course, after that, Lawson, who studied civil engineering at Trent Polytechnic in Nottingham, England. Stayed with our uncles, Ambrose and Johnson and Washington, who were then resident in Nottingham, England. Ambrose has since passed away. Johnson is now in Dominica, retired. Johnson is now in the United Kingdom, retired. Washington is in Dominica, retired. And he then went to New York, where he studied engineering at Hunter College, City University of New York. And then Esther, as you know, studied accounting at the University of the District of Columbia, and then later got a Masters of Science from Johns Hopkins University in Behavioral Sciences. And Hildreth, who did environmental sciences at both the University of the District of Columbia and American University. So we give thanks for their service. We give thanks for their achievements. But tell me a little bit about what you remember about Newtown, if anything. And what do you remember about your early days? Where did you attend school? And give us a sense of the parenting that allowed for your early success in academia.
Well, I touched on that briefly. Don't remember much about Newtown. I think we relocated to Pottersville before I had any age of awareness, although I vaguely think I saw a band, a carnival band, when I was leaning out of the house, wherever that may be. In fact, I met a gentleman the other day who told me that's where you all used to live. And
so there's a gentleman you met who said he knew where you lived in Newtown.
Newtown, yes. And also those who remember us from Pottersville as well, including the juice man, Frederick. But I may have tumbled, as most children did at some point, and we all seem to have a scar on the forehead. That might have been at that time. I have no idea. But in Pottersville, and after I started going to school, went to the Rosa Mixed Infant School, where I don't think my aunt was principal at that time, but I remember one of the first visits, parent-teachers visits, my father marched to the Rosa Mixed Infant School right there on Cork Street, around from the fire headquarters, and he was in his uniform looking very sharp. I felt so proud. And the teacher, who was a stout, dark lady with tortoise-shelled glasses, she said, Samuel is very good with his figures, but he likes to play. And so that was the consistent, I guess, report that I would get throughout.
So stop for a moment. Are you saying that your first school that you remember was the Rosa Mixed Infant School?
That's correct.
I didn't know that you had gone to the Rosa Mixed Infant School for some reason. Because Esther and I attended there.
Yes. We, I remember playing in the schoolyard. They would sing teams and the whole shoulder to shoulder. And so, are you ready for the fight? For we are the Romans. We are ready for the fight. For we are the Roman soldiers. And then
that is true. I remember that, Sam.
And then we would share recess. And then when the bell ring to go back inside, everybody would rush for water, fight for water, and then some say, my head burst, and try to get water first.
When you say for water, where were they going to get the water?
Well, from a pipe, from a faucet, the one faucet, I suppose, somewhere in the schoolyard.
So isn't it the case that in that time in Dominica, most homes did not have indoor plumbing, even in Roseau, so that the government had situated at the corners of most streets a standpipe? Tell us about the standpipe culture.
Well, of course, as alluded to earlier on, we had to carry water. That was the duty, the chores of the children. And when we lived in Boyce Avenue, the standpipe there was mossy. That was when I was 13.
Stop for a moment, Sam. For a moment, Sam, because by the time we got to Pifto Street, we did not take pipe from the waters because we had indoor plumbing. It was a modern bungalow upstairs and downstairs. But when we were at more humble dwellings in, I guess, Elliott Avenue, that is where we had to use the what you call standpipe, because we didn't have indoor plumbing. Is that not correct?
That's correct, yeah.
I remember we also had a outhouse, meaning we didn't have an indoor. We did not have an indoor toilet. There was a little shed at the back of the house with a latrine, which was a box which had a lid on it that sat over a hole, and you pooped in there and you closed the lid so that flies wouldn't get in, and you had a door.
Too much information.
But I'm just trying to give, for the listeners who later, maybe years on, tried to kind of get a sense of flavor, not to use flavor in connection with excretory material, but the fact is we did not have indoor plumbing, and so we had to rely on the standpipe, and people in the neighborhood have to sometimes line up. So you may not be the first person at the standpipe. You'd have to line up with your bucket. Is that right?
Nothing compared to the latrine in St. Joseph, where Mom was born, and it was behind her house, overlying the sea. You would climb up this ramp, and you would sit there, and when you look below, you would see the Caribbean Sea. And then, well, I'll withhold the details, but it was a scary thing to be going that high. As little children, that was seemed like a great height, and to be over the sea was, that helped take care of any of those phobias and so forth that people may have developed in other areas.
Whoever designed that, I guess there's a degree of ingenuity and there was a degree of public health consciousness, because later on in life, I learned that the issue of hookworms or worm infestation really resided in people defecating in areas that were public pathways. And that if you walked in a public pathway area with feces, human feces, in that turd could be the egg or the early formed worm, and they could actually bore through your heel. And then you would have these worms within your intestine. So the idea was to put the toilet over the sea, so the remains or whatever remains of digestion would fall into the sea and be consumed by some other creature and be carried away far from any beaten path where you would have a public health issue. So it was kind of interesting, but in a way made sense, because unless of course if the stuff was washed back on shore, as maybe happened on occasion. But it was interesting to see how the colonial authorities handled the public health. Is there anything else in early childhood that you can tell us about public health? You talked about public latrines, talked about standpipes, anything else?
Well, nothing that I can think of right at this moment, but we'll come back to it as we go ahead.
Okay, so you're at the Roseau Mixed Infant School. How did you develop at that time your artistic prowess? Because I know that by Goodwill Junior High School, when I remembered you best, you were already a very good artist.
Not that I can recall. I went to the Roseau Girls' School in the interim, and was there during the time that the old hospital, or where the current government headquarters was, that big wooden structure burned down, and I could feel the heat. Around, across from the street. And the Roseau Girls' School was situated where the at the edge of the stadium, at the edge of the Windsor Park at the time. So by the time I got to Goodwill School, yes, then I remember, drawing, sketching, and that was interesting.
And this is a fascinating interview, because I've lived with you all my life now, pretty much, except when you were studying overseas and I was in Dominica. And then, of course, when you went to Ohio. But I never knew that you had gone to the Roseau Girls' School as I did. I went to the Roseau Girls' School after Goodwill School.
You did? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes.
I thought
so I went
by that time it had been integrated. It was Roseau Girls' School, but boys attended at the time. Just like Dominica Grammar School later on, we had it was a boys' school, and then the girls came in.
Yeah, Major Francis Richards told me of being in the Roseau Girls' School. So we had a Roseau Boys' School, which I didn't go to. I went to private preschools. I went to Antiguan School by the sea, then the preschool in St. Alphonsus. But the school I remember the best as a kindergarten sort of student or early elementary school would have been the Goodwill Junior High School. Then I went from there to the Roseau Girls' School for like a semester, right?
A term.
And a Miss Mead was very evil towards me. She would pinch me and pull my ears, and I reported her. And then I went to we moved then to the DD Lane, and then Esther and I went to the Goodwill Junior High School. But for a while, when Esther left Roseau Mixed Infant School, I believe Esther went to the St. Martin's School for a little bit. I remember her in her St. Martin's School uniform, which would be the blue overalls and the white shirt. And it was run by a famous Belgian nun, very severe in her habit, called Sister Borgia. Bread and boulja, bread and boulja. Boulja was a saltfish, codfish sandwich with curry and onions and garlic and peppers that they would sell, very, very savory. And she was famous for that, for fundraisers. So they called her Sister Borgia, B-O-R-G-I-A, bread and boulja. Boulja, I guess, is B-U-L-L-J-A-R or something like that. I'm not sure, I digress.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, that was basically it. And we didn't think anything of it going to the Rosa Girls School, right? So our feminine side, I guess, was very well developed at that time.
Let me ask you about uniforms. I don't remember us having uniforms per se at the Rosa Mixed Infant School. Do you?
I can't remember per se, but we probably had some. So there's always been uniformity in all the schools in Dominica of some kind. And maybe it was not as distinctive, but maybe we had some khaki shorts or something. I don't know.
Khaki shorts for sure, because that was almost de rigueur. You went to school with khaki shorts. The shirts I don't remember, but I remember once we went to Rosa Girls School, you had to wear a green shirt. That's the first uniform I remembered. And then when we went to the Goodwill Junior High School, we had to wear a brown shirt of cotton and a khaki pants. And the girls had to wear a brown, dark chocolate brown sort of coverall and white shirts beneath. And that was at the Goodwill Junior High School. And then, of course, once you go to high school, which we'll talk about shortly, it was even more elegant, distinguished. But tell me about your time at the Goodwill Junior High School, the principal at the time, and give us a sense of the school, the construction, the design, the amenities that it provided, because it was quite extraordinary, if you can maybe enlighten your listeners.
Well, it was built by the Canadians, a gift from Canada, and it was the most modern school, I would say. Well, at least the most recently built school. And it's very well equipped. It had, workshops and so forth. And I remember the large aluminum panes, so it was supposedly very hurricane resistant until the big hurricanes came. But yeah, that is has just now recently been decommissioned, I guess, after Hurricane Maria. But that much I can remember. Well, very well equipped.
Sam, that school was spectacular. And the older I become, the more proud I am of the designers who designed that school in the tropics. Canada, of course, is a temperate country with 4 seasons. But here we were in Dominica, very warm, 80, 90 degree weather. And what they did was the exterior, Sam, on the seaside, in part was made of decorative blocks. That meant it wasn't solid brick. The blocks had holes in them, so the sea breeze could go through. The aluminum slats were separated maybe at 36-inch intervals, bending somehow down, so the wind would go upward. And on the inside was a wire lattice, a wire sort of a mesh. Again, what is that allowing? The free flow of air from one side of the building to the next.
Right.
I don't believe
natural ventilation is.
Natural ventilation, Sam. I mean, I just think of it now. And on the inside in the classroom, separating the different classrooms, again, it was not solid concrete or wood. There were wooden slats.
Slats, yeah.
Separated maybe 4 inches distant between each slat until you got to the door. So at no time was there any sort of interruption of the airflow. The flow could be from one side of the building through to the other side, in the process cooling the students. And I never really felt overwhelmed by heat. Any comments?
Well, you very well describe the architecture of the building. But I do remember being a student there under the distinguished Isaiah Thomas, who was known as a principal at various schools where he served as principal, getting high degree of scholarships. And I can tell you why, because would have extra classes. And I remember one time I was playing on the Goodwill Junior High School, Savannah there, and came in late for class, and he called me to do a long division sum. I automatically raise my left hand because he was a left-hander, and he would write on the board. And I stumbled, I lapsed, and it gave me a callop, pow, behind the head. I mean, it stung, but it must have worked because I did well ever since. So he later became a minister of education and had the school, next high school named after him in St. Joseph, the
So you're
Isaiah
saying that
Thomas Secondary School.
I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
you're saying that corporal punishment was very prevalent in those days, and teachers would sometimes slap you.
Yes, and of course we'll talk about the grammar school in a moment, but we had caning and stuff like that. So I think it's a very good argument and discussion about the merits of corporal punishment, but that was the norm in those days. And there are certainly instances of excesses, and there are certainly instances now of juvenile delinquents or bad behavior among students. So it's a good discussion to be had. We certainly grew up as corporal punishment in the family. And
how do you compare juvenile delinquency in Dominica now, as you've been able to experience it, living 7 years as a doctor, from 2013 or so to 2021? Almost
8 years.
7 years. 8 years.
8 years.
How do you compare crime in Dominica then and now?
Well, without question, there's been a deterioration in standards across the board. I mean, not just in juvenile delinquents. As far as respect for law and order, respect for authorities, respect for teachers, parents, and so forth. Now, it may not be simply attributed to the withdrawal of corporal punishment. It's a global thing in many respects, but that's how culture evolves, and there are different methods of punishing and sanctioning students. And I'm not an educator, so I wouldn't pretend to be an expert in the area, but the whole mindset of in Dominica in particular has to do, I think, with the leadership from the top and the morality. So people see leaders that are not very disciplined in their own ways, and so it follows down through society. The fish head rots from the head, as they say. And so that part, I think, certainly will be controlled in time, because nations go through cycles of prosperity and difficulty. It's just like the children of Israel in the Old Testament. So I think now in Dominica, it's at the nadir, at the lowest point, and I anticipate at some point in time there will be relief and there will be recovery. And we hope that all those listening will be part of that recovery.
Thank you, Sam, for making that point. And I know that you make the point that maybe it's a cultural thing globally, that we see now more juvenile delinquency, gangs, drugs. We now have the advent of internet technology that we didn't have. So there is maybe the transmission in a seamless way of bad behavior from countries that at some point in our past were much more removed. We had to delve into books. I remember as a child, you would hear things like in New York City, it was so violent that you'd be walking and you'd shoot a man right next to you and you just keep walking, and we had this image of New York City and so on, and you grow up and you travel to New York City, and that's not the way at all. There's crime in New York City, but it's not as vicious or as rampant as we used to think. In fact, in our small island, I dare say, we have grave concern in a breakdown in law and order, and that we did have corporal punishment. Obviously, as you said, there would have been, I'm sure, abuses, but do you believe that the corporal punishment that you received as a student at any of the schools made for a better Samuel Christian or a more indisciplined Samuel Christian? Your thoughts?
Well, we come from the biblical perspective, spare the rod and spoil a child. And I certainly was not spoiled, and I certainly was not spared the rod. So those two are facts. And I don't know about your children, but our father would use the big fire brigade belt, and he would flog us, put us to kneel down and whap. I never did anything like that with my children, but I certainly spanked them up to a certain point. There's always a point where, you know, when you stop spanking, when you begin to reason things out and use other measures, other sanctions. But again, you know, this is something that we can say we had good parenting. It wasn't just for the punishment. It was also the rewards. It was also the example, as you were fond of pointing out when our dad had at a public meeting with Dr. Royer, the psychiatrist, and he was smoking. And, you know, my father chastened him and said, you should not be smoking in public because you doctors tell people not to smoke, and there you are smoking. And he said, well, it's a, what was his response? Something to the effect that it was a personal choice, you know, and, yeah. And my father, our father said, Daddy said, you know, example is better than precept. And those are famous words in our family, you know, that we always should set a good example and not just talk the talk, but actually walk the walk.
Indeed, Sam, that's a wonderful piece of memory there of our father. God bless him. Wendell Mackenzie Christian, British Army. That's all he said he wanted on his tombstone. I think we put a little more. I want to thank you for your recent efforts in getting his tombstone installed. But he was born March 5th, 1921 and died October 7th, 2011. He made it to 90 and he was hoping for 100, but, you know, good Lord took him away. But he, as you said, was a disciplinarian. I remember, though, towards the end, you know, his back was worse than his bite. I remember once I did something and I ran away and he said, Gabriel, if you come now, I'll give you 6. If you come later, I'll give you 12. So he bargained with you. With our mother, there was no bargaining. And I waited until the lights were off. And when I noticed everyone had gone to sleep, we were in DD Lane at the time. I saw the lights were off in the house. I stopped. I got out from wherever I was on a tree somewhere in the neighborhood. And I snuck to the back on the wall of the neighbor, David. What was David's last name? Mr. David.
Mr. David.
Mr. David. And I jumped through the window and I snuck into bed. And shortly after that, Daddy came into the room, put the lights on, and I said, I caught you now, I beat you like a snake.
Did you recall getting 12 or 6?
No, he didn't give me anything. I held his hand and I held his hand and he laughed and said, okay, you know, don't do it again. I go back to sleep. And I was spared the rod. So I think that was the last episode. But, you know, our parents, whenever they disciplined us, they didn't just hit us. They gave always a speech. I think the speech Ma always, or Daddy would give, it was a famous one of a boy who was scheduled to be hung. And they asked him what was his last wish. And he said he would like to speak to his mother. His hands were pinned behind him, he was on the gallows. And they brought his mother to him, as they were wont to do. And he said something to her, and she said, I cannot hear you. So he said, lean your ears close to my mouth. Lean your ears close to my mouth. And as she did so, he bit her ears. And she jumped back and said, why did you do that? He said, if when I was a little boy committing crimes, you had punished me, I wouldn't be on the gallows today. So they always put this morality tale before us that they were punishing us out of love, out of a desire to ensure that we did not join that guy on the gallows, and that if we were punished and we accepted punishment with stoicism and with understanding, we would be able to grow up with a degree of rectitude.
Well, that was a very strong story because we couldn't see ourselves biting our mother's ear under any circumstances, but I didn't know you had that experience. And that's interesting because, during First Communion and confirmation time, there were parties at different houses. Now, we were not party people, you know, we did not have a gramophone. Party for us was, you know, having the relatives come over and having a little wine and cake and shandy, which is a mixture, for those who don't know, in the Caribbean, of beer and soft drink, and in which case, you know, Caribbean people are introduced gradually to alcohol, as opposed to the United States, where 21 people are bombarded with alcohol, and then every year you hear of so many young people dying of alcohol poisoning because they go to the bar and they say, drink up, you're a big man now. But in any case, we would go, I remember going with some of the friends to mop, you know, uninvited, just go to the...
When you say mop, M-O-P,
MOP, so you're crashing the party and you're
So mop was another term for gate crashing.
Gate crashing, yeah. And so my favorite thing was stuffed eggs or deviled eggs, you know. I would zero in on that, you know, but then as we became, you know, thought we were becoming men, whether we were 14, 15 or so, you know, the guys would want to be at the back where the big men were with the bottles of gin and brandy and tonic and whatever. And so we'd sneak drinks, you know, and I wasn't very keen because that's not the way we were brought up, but the guys, the peer pressure, you know, so they asked me to drink some. So I had the brandy, I had the whiskey, I had the rum, I had all of that. And then as we moved on, I said, you know, I think I'm not feeling too well. I think I have to go home. So coming up Didier Lane, as you approach the crest of the hill, I remember when my head reached the height of the crest of the hill as I was coming, I began to see the road swaying like that. And I began to panic and I ran up the hill, burst through the door, went through the washroom, and then it just all came out in a mighty rush. And I didn't know the term about kneeling before the porcelain princess, but that's what I was doing. So just collapsed over the toilet bowl. And Daddy appeared with his belt in hand. And like Abraham about to slay Isaac on the altar of sacrifice, you know, he was about to bring down that, and Mom stopped him. You know, he said, "Hey, last Wendell, you know, can't you see the poor boy is suffering? Why you want to beat him now?" He says, "You know, none of my children are going to become alcoholics. Never want you to do that again. Clean it up, clean it up." I could barely move. But, you know, that was better fate than what was about to rain down on me, you know. And I can say that whether I was 14 or 15, I have never, ever again in my life, you know, after maybe 50 years up to this day, by the grace of God, never been drunk and puking my guts out like I did at that time.
Sam, that's a powerful story. Never heard it before. And I just want to share that his father was a sergeant in the Leeward Islands Police Force, and he was in charge of the Eastern District. And Daddy said to me that he would drink, and when he would drink, you know, he would break up things in the house. And maybe that's the experience that made him a teetotaler. You know, he didn't smoke and he drank very, very rarely. You know, he drank on high holidays, Easter, Christmas, New Year's. You'd take a little bit of, these are the three things he would make. He would make shandy for us. He would make stout and egg for us. Stout and egg is stout and an egg and condensed milk blended together with lime peel and nutmeg.
Now, stout, maybe not as common here, but it's like a Guinness or a dark lager.
Yeah, dark lager. Stout is a dark lager, like Guinness. Then you also make something called eggnog. Not eggnog, no.
Yes, eggnog is shodo, well.
No, not eggnog. It was something else. It was, I'll tell you what it was made of. It was made of Gordon's dry gin and condensed milk with grated nutmeg and a piece of lime peel. Because Daddy served in the British Army in the bar on occasion on base. So he knew a few things about drinks. Mm-hmm. And it was like it was like his version of eggnog, I guess.
Yeah, know? What was it called in at the police headquarters at that time? The canteen. Yeah, he was
the canteen.
Canteen, and canteen. Also he was the quartermaster.
Well, so he was very good at arithmetic and reading. He was very literate.
He could write properly.
And he could write properly. He was an elegant writer. In fact, we have found
in those days there was a higher degree of illiteracy. Yes,
high degree of literacy. But his family was very literate. Let the record reflect that his older brother went to London University, did a diploma there, and was Minister of Education when we were children.
It's Uncle Henkel Christian.
Uncle Henkel. And his other brother, Ellen Christian, was a member of the Royal Society of Music and was a classical musician with the first music school in the Eastern Caribbean, and wrote wrote the music to Dominica's national anthem. W.M. Pond wrote, W.O.M. Pond, P-O-N-D, wrote the lyrics or the words, but the musical score was written by
Lemuel
McPherson Christian. So again, you had
which by the way, at the Olympics of 2016 or somewhere, like, you know, some prestigious organization ranked the national anthems of all the participating countries, and Dominica was ranked, I think, number in the top 10.
Top 10.
Top 10.
Dominica's national anthem ranks in the top 10. It's very good, very well done. And he also wrote the school song of the musical score for the school song of the Dominica Grammar School, or alma mater, the greatest. The greatest, the greatest, the greatest of all builders, wrought with his mighty hand.
And so forth.
Now before us with hands and feet, whatever.
The mansion he made was perfect, nor could be otherwise.
Now from his deep foundation, made visible with patience, a school for human eyes. I mean, you know, I know the transcriptionists will have a problem with that, but that's okay. We're having this tape recorded. And so we were very fortunate to have had a father who was highly literate, and that caused the British Army to put his team in the stores to do logistics. You calculate this, you calculate that. And in that position, while he was in the army, he became a agent for Sears, Roebuck and Company in the United States, and Eaton's, a Canadian firm, and he would order things. So when he came back to Dominica, he had a wristwatch and camera and would order clothing and different things for soldiers, because they were not at the front. They were in the garrison area of the Caribbean. Some went to Italy and Egypt, but they were not in combat. They were doing garrison duty. So it was more relaxed sort of atmosphere. And they would, of course, draw their supplies down from the US Army Air Corps base at Beanfield, which is now Huronora Airport in St. Lucia. But I went to St. Lucia in 2006 with the family, and I saw the sign, Beanfield. That's what that base was. So there are two bases that the US had at Beanfield and at Vieux-Fort. So the Royal Army Supply Corps would go every Saturday to get their food from the US Army base. Virginia ham, raspberry jam, strawberry jam, Pepsi Cola, and Spam, and Lucky Strike cigarettes. So he said that they had all these things. And of course, a lot of US equipment like Studebaker trucks, Willis Jeeps, Thompson submachine gun. And so they were the British Army, but really US supplies, you know. So he had that culture in the family of a lot of stores. So I remember as a child in our home, he would have a 100-pound bag of flour, 100-pound bag of sugar, 100-pound bag of rice in the house, and he had barrels he would store them in. Remember that, Sam?
And he carried that training into the police headquarters canteen.
That's right. Well, do you know how he became the manager of the canteen at the police headquarters?
No, I don't.
In 1956 or 55, the superintendent of police was BB Humphreys, former British Army captain in St. Vincent, who Daddy had served on. And Daddy said when the army was demobilized, when they said the local legislature wouldn't vote money to maintain a regiment, they decided to disband the Leeward Islands Battalion, the Windward Islands Battalion. And he said, BB Humphreys came on parade and said to his wife, honey, they've disbanded the army. We're finished. And he was later sent to Dominica. And you know, Lennox Honeychurch, the famous Dominican historian, at some point in time in recent years, placed on Facebook a picture of BB Humphreys, who was either, I think he was a West Indian white. In St. Vincent, Dominica, Jamaica, you've got people who are West Indians, but they are descendants of the British planters, West Indian whites, we call them. And he was there with some policemen with a cup for shooting competition. So when he came to Dominica, he saw father, because at that time, the fire service and the police service were under one chief. There was no fire chief. The police chief was a fire chief. And he said, this is Christian, my old storeman from the army, put him in the canteen. So that's how he became the canteen manager, because he had been the canteen manager in St. Vincent, I believe.
Wow.
And St. Lucia, yes. That's how that happened, yes. So.
Well, thanks for the details. I mean, you are just pregnant with details. Not pregnant, but pregnant with all the historical details.
Yes, Captain BB Humphreys. Honey, the army has been disbanded. We're finished. and he was finished because shortly thereafter, or 2 years or so, there was a shooting during the carnival at Soufriere, where one woman was shot by a .303 bullet that was fired by the police against the band movie, which was sense-clad revelers who were violent. And he had gone there on a lunch with the head of Elrose and Company and his wife, and the Commission of Inquiry was led by Q.C. Alleyne. Q.C. Alleyne was the brother of Osmond Sinclair Alleyne, Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve, who died in combat over Malta. He was a sergeant in the Royal Air Force. And he went to study medicine at Cambridge, and Q.C. Alleyne went to Middle Temple. So he died, Q.C. Alleyne lived, became a very famous lawyer, and was made a one-man commissioner to study the shooting, and he recommended that Humphreys be discharged because he was said to have accompanied the riot squad as if he was going on a picnic, and he was said to have allowed for the wanton use of live ammunition, which should not have been allowed. And so he left Dominica, unfortunately, in disgrace. Yeah.
It would be interesting if we would have a commission of inquiry into the shootings of innocent civilians in Salisbury.
Well, Sam, this is the problem with the current government we have, as you know, which is lawless. It's a lawless government. They've been asked over many years, 20 years, to have commissions of inquiry into the appointment of ambassadors who turned out to be gangsters, the shootings in Salisbury, different acts of government misconduct. In every single instance, they have denied what is in our tradition of rule of law, to have a commission. Because, for instance, we had a commission of inquiry into the 1963 fire. Before that, we had a commission of inquiry into the 1956 shooting at Soufriere. We had a commission of inquiry into the 1971 riots at the courthouse, which is House of Assembly, which you, I think, were present. We had a commission of inquiry into the Dominican Defense Force. We had a commission of inquiry.
No, when you say I was present, I was not involved. I may have witnessed something.
Well, you be a witness. And we had a commission of inquiry.
I was involved in other things.
Yes. We had a commission of inquiry into the May 29th riot. And we had a commission of inquiry during the time of Eugenia Charles also into the National Youth Council with Judge Matthews. And I sat on that commission because they thought the National Youth Council election, which brought Pierre Charles to power, was somehow influenced by the left and there was misconduct. None was found. I was a token left-wing representative on that commission. So even on the Freedom Party administration, they had a Commissioner Matthews and they placed me on there as a sub to the political left or the political opposition to make sure that it was above board. And then later on, there was a commission of inquiry into the Bogner allegation during the time of the UWP in opposition. There was an allegation that the Freedom Party had bogged the office of the United Workers' Party through a guy called Gonzalez, a security guard. And Tony Asafan was the government's examiner. I'm not sure who the commissioner was. So here's this tradition in Dominica from the British of commissions of inquiry for matters in public controversy to give the public a sense that things are being investigated and any wrongs are going to be corrected. This tradition has been eviscerated under this regime. And that's quite sad because as a result of that, Dominica is a more lawless country.
So if I would proceed to high school.
Yes, the Dominica Grammar School. How did you get to the Dominica Grammar School? And tell us about the common entrance exam.
Well, the common entrance exam, which is now called the grade 6 test. I'm not sure the other words, but it's a little bit fancier word. Of all the students in Standard 6, I guess, you would either get a scholarship if you're among the top students, so you'd get a bursary or you'd get a pass. And the school system was elitist at that time, so you had a small number of people going into high school. Of course, our parents did not get the opportunity to go to high school. Of course, nowadays they certainly would have. And so I did not get a scholarship. I got a bursary. So I encourage a lot of students who did not do as well in the common entrance examination that there's always more of a chance. And of course, everyone goes to just about. You have to try very hard not to go to high school in Dominica. And so you have a much more universal education. Just about anybody who wants to can go to the Dominica State College. And from there, we have an easy access to higher education overseas. Certainly is it Midwestern in Texas? It's like a Dominican college over there as well.
Well, there are people like, I think,
not to mention, of course, not to forget Cuban scholarships and a lot of other scholarships from several different countries which were not available in our time.
That's right. There are scholarships from the Organization of American States. There are scholarships from Commonwealth countries. There are scholarships from the Cuban government that the political left had arranged. That is, I think, the biggest source of scholarships. And then they are now, within the past 10 or so years, well, maybe a little, yeah, when this gentleman, Dr. Donald Peters, was the dean at Plattsburgh University, upstate New York, he started opening doors for Dominicans. And he also opened doors for Dominicans when he was at the University of Mississippi, and he's credited for that. And later on, he helped form or helped organize the state college. But I think the Ito gentleman, who is now the head of the Freedom Party, when he was at Midwestern, I think, arranged that the students from Dominica could get in there. I think they may have to pay, they would pay local rates, something like that. And then also, there is I think, relationship with Grambling University in Louisiana, where quite a few Dominican students have gone.
Not to forget, of course, the Chinese scholarships. A great many students get to study in China as well.
Yes, so the opportunities that are now present in our independent Dominica for higher education are much more, let's say, luxuriant. They're much more. There's much more scholarship affluence than in our day, but has it meant a higher degree of industry, a higher degree of productivity? I doubt it. Great many of the students never return, and Dominica does not have the industry and the agriculture that we had to employ people. In fact, Dominica is almost a country now solely dependent on passports. Before we go talk about that lack of industry, can you tell us, when you entered the Dominica Grammar School, what kind of industry was present in the Dominica of that time?
Well, certainly Dominica in the 1930s, which was before our time, was the leading producer of limes in the world. Limes was very important for the British Navy, for all seafaring people, because scurvy, the deficiency of vitamin C, would lead to medical conditions that limes was the treatment for the high level of vitamin C. Now, so in our time at Elrose and Company, you mentioned the Elrose in Soufriere, which was also the nerve center of lime protection in Dominica, in which they made lime juice cordial and stuff coming back from Britain, which was a very important. What's that?
I bought some lime juice cordial yesterday. You can get it at the liquor store, and it says Elrose and Company.
Okay, I was hoping it wasn't one of those other drinks that we mentioned earlier.
No.
No, but so when the British warships would come to visit, and they would stay at the fire station, at the fire brigade upstairs.
No, you're confusing two things. The British warships folks stayed on the warship, but when the Royal Marines came in, the time you were young.
Or they were Marines.
Royal Marines came and they were on exercises, and they stayed at the fire station.
Oh, the Royal Marines. Okay, good. Okay, good. So they would see the Elrose tractor passing, laden with limes. And of course, limes nowadays, you say, $3, $4, $5 or something like that. But you had limes. And they would say, send us some. And they would pelt limes upstairs, and they would catch them and start eating them,
Yes,
And the locals would be, what's wrong with these people, because of the rind and, the acid content and stuff like that, but they just loved it. So that is a picture. You were saying?
They call them limeys.
Yes, that's a picture of the prolific agriculture that we had, and at Elrose, which was situated behind grammar school at the turn of the Rosa River there, they would dump the limes after they were crushed, and it would float down the river. You'd see the river turn yellow with limes. We would go and collect some of that crushed lime peel to feed our cows.
They loved it.
Yeah.
Sam, the pig, the cows lapped that up. They loved
that was a treat. That was a treat. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, they love that lime peel. Sam,
but you were going to say something about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was just saying, the land that the grammar school was on was donated by Elrose and Company. And as a matter of fact, at the back of the school was an old 1900 old steam tractor from the early days of mechanized agriculture. We'll go play on it. right between the school and the wall that separated it from the works. Remember that old tractor in
Yeah,
the corner?
of course, yeah.
Yes, it was an old steam tractor. Furthermore, what is remarkable, and I say this with great regret, that in the time we grew up in Dominica, there were tractors up and down. There was a Caterpillar dealership where the Aid Bank is now located called Domtrack. Remember that? Susan Sampson, the girlfriend of deceased brother, Dr. Christian, before he went to India, her brother Van Doe, he's since passed, was a famous mechanic there. He used to be all in khaki. I never forget that, Van Doe. There was a dealership selling Caterpillar tractors, Caterpillar excavators. And you see excavators excavating at the Tarish pit to sell pumice to Puerto Rico. And you see excavators being carried on these long trailers to go to different places. And then you see the tractors from Melrose pulling they were carriers behind. They were hitched to, so it was a carrier which was maybe 12 feet by 6 feet wide, hipped with limes. 43 years after independence, Sam, you don't see tractors on the road anymore in Dominica.
I don't think there's a tractor in Dominica right now.
That is a shame. That is a shame. There's maybe not one tractor on the island now of any kind doing any agricultural work.
And I know you've been working with some peoples of interest who have been produced indigenous tractors in Cuba and in other parts of the world.
Yes, I wanted to get back to, his name is Horace Clements from North Carolina, born in Alabama, US Marine, worked with IBM. I hope is that we can find some funding to do this as a demonstrative project that we can have in a parade, in a carnival band, to have carnival be not simply about celebratory, but about industry. To have independence not simply be about the celebratory, but be about industry. So we can show Dominicans what can be done. We know that at the grammar school, when I went, there was a Dominica Grammar School technical wing, where in 1972, 73, I saw they built a car out of disparate parts, discarded parts. They built a car on the grammar school compound, and Georgie Ifield and some of the Winston brothers who were in the technical wing were driving the car around the school compound. Do you remember that?
Of course, and so that's a very good point, and you've referenced in the past to the 1967 expo in the botanical gardens, and of course, I spent some time in Ohio and in all parts of the United States. They have county fairs, and the county fairs, the farmers would bring their produce, the biggest pumpkin, the biggest yam or whatever, the biggest cow, the biggest rabbit, the 4-H club, and whatever. So it's a time of showcasing the achievement of people. And that's the way it was in Dominica and linking up with the surrounding islands. And you described, no one can describe better than you, the Grenada booth that was built like a nutmeg, wasn't it?
Sam, thank God for technology. I have since on the University of Florida archives, digital archives, found the Star article. I think it is in 1969. It was not 67, it was 69, Dominica. It was Windward Island Expo. It was Expo 69. That was the name of it, Expo 69. And the most spectacular exhibit was that of Grenada. Grenada built a nutmeg on the grounds of the Botanic Gardens with
two-story
with a cylindrical staircase leading you from the ground story to the second story, and it was suffused with the aroma of spices, in particular nutmeg. And I remember there were little packets of produce they would give you, a little cinnamon spice, a little nutmeg. And I remember going back several times and asking for samples, and I'd run home and bring it to Ma to say, look, I got samples from Grenada. And the blind workshop, that's when they made their first presentation, and they were making baskets and hampers in the open air, and people were looking at them because people had never seen blind people making anything with their hands before.
And that's where our mother was the instructors for the blind, taking over from Mrs. H.L. Christian, Muriel Christian, now deceased.
That's correct.
But she certainly did great work with them and bringing them up with plays. We had a great play in the St. Jared's Hall that was under the patronage of the governor. And, you know, I was, as a teenager, involved in helping training them. We all were. Tell them to take 3 steps to the right, turn left on stage, and then say your piece. And, you know, the famous play was called Se Kosayo Ye. And it was, the script was written by the women themselves. Well, there was a man.
Starret Francois, Dominica's Ray Charles. He played the mouth organ and the piano. And
became a famous member of the Gaylords Power Union.
That's right. All over the place. Toured all over the place. And I remember one of the songs was Ma Bello Belly Bolo, Ma Bello Belly Bolo, Ma Bello Belly Bolo, Ma Bello, whatever. That was one of the songs I remembered. And
that the blind people sang.
And it was that they were raising funds to build their headquarters, because at that time they were lodged at the Dominica Infirmary in Portersville. So they were raising funds with the help of the Dominica Lions Club. And it was only later, Sam, when I gave an address to the DC Lions Club here, that I did some research and found out that the Lions had a long history with helping blind folk going back to the days of Helen Keller.
Wow.
That their main mission, Sam, when they were founded by business people, was to help the blind. I didn't know that. I only found that out in my 40s.
Well, of course, you're a voracious reader, aren't you?
Well, Sam,
able to.
Well, I was in the circuit court for Charles County in La Plata. La Plata and Charles County were featured heavily in the assassination of President Lincoln. That is where John Wilkes Booth ran to hide. And on the way to court, and from court, I always see the historical marker, Dr. Mudd's house. Dr. Mudd was a Georgetown University Medical School graduate.
Samuel Mudd.
Dr. Samuel Mudd, no relationship to you, I hope, who set
He sullied that great name.
He sullied that great name.
Of the prophet.
And that's where the term came from, your name is now Mudd. His name became a sort of byword for ignominy, for treachery.
Yeah, he messed up. He messed up real bad. You're a great lover of Lincoln, aren't you?
I'm a Lincoln scholar, I'm happy to say, and I want to say that history is indeed kind, has been kind. I went to the University of the District of Columbia, College of Business and Public Management from 1983, January through May of 1986. And in my first semester, the College of Business and Public Management was at 10th and East Street, Northwest Washington. Across the street from FBI headquarters and around the corner from Ford's Theater, where Lincoln was shot on the evening of April 14, 1865, and died on the morning of April 15, 1865 at 7:22 a.m. That's when
you hear that? If you think I was lying, listen to the detail that you can get probably from nowhere else.
Yes,
by Mr. Booth, who was a very angry, he had been saying some very mean things about Lincoln for a while.
He was a Southern sympathizer, he was a Confederate sympathizer, and an incorrigible racist, who, in his own way said in his diary, that I'm the greatest friend there ever was of the Negro. And I only wanted to ensure that the Negro was not mistreated. If he were freed, who would take care of him? This was
sounds very familiar.
Well,
we won't make any references.
Yes, indeed. So I want to say that I love history, and that's maybe what led me to Georgetown University Law Center and a Juris Doctor degree, because you need to know the history of the case. And when you do a closing, the worst thing is reading from notes. I had a trial once where a lawyer who preceded me, he had about 20 pages unstapled, and they fell on the floor in the well of the courtroom, and they scattered. And he kept saying, "Beg your indulgence, Your Honor," as he tried to assemble his papers. "Beg your indulgence, Your Honor. You're on arrest," because he was totally discombobulated. So the idea is to read your notes and then put your notes aside and speak to the jurors eye to eye, man to man, woman to woman, and that's much more convincing, because your mastery of the detail allows you to exude more confidence to those who are listening, as opposed to reading from a script which is sort of pedantic.
So grammar school.
Yes.
When I went to grammar school on the first week, we were on having the sports PE day, and we were dressed all in white shirt, white pants, white socks, bobby socks, and tennis shoes, which we had to whiten. No longer done nowadays.
With something called nugget. Something called nugget.
That's right. You would scrub your shoes with a brush and whiten it and be looking spick and span. So the sportsmaster was Mr. Fenton. He was wearing a white floppy hat, and he was similarly clad. And
where was he from?
From England. I'm not sure which part, but he was putting us through calisthenics and wanted us to touch our toes. And I'd made a friend by the name of Simpson Roberts, and Simpson Roberts was on the heavy side, and he could not reach his toes. So Mr. Fenton pushed him down and said he had to touch his toes. And he was complaining that he couldn't do it and it was hurting him. So I told him, Mr. Fenton, can't you see that you're hurting him? He said, he told me to shut up. I said, but you're hurting him. You cannot do that, and I came in between him and Simpson Roberts. So Mr. Fenton put me in detention. Now, I didn't know what that was. It was the first week. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. But, I think from that time, I always had that notion of, standing up for the defenseless and the weak.
Sam, is that the same Simpson Roberts who became known as Jughead, as after the Archie comic character?
Jughead, indeed. And, we became very close friends. I went to visit Jughead in Collie-Ho. And when after I returned to Dominica while I was studying, he said that I was the only student who came to visit him in Collie-Ho. And that his grandmother would say, how about that Christian boy who came to visit you? And he says, well, he's in America studying to become a surgeon, and he's going to come back to Dominica, And every time I returned to Dominica and I saw Jughead, he would tell me, he would come back to Dominica. And then once when I spoke to him, he said his grandmother had died, So I said to, I really do have to come back to Dominica. Well, it was very tight when you were quote unquote greener pastures and you have a family and so forth, coming back to Dominica. But God has a way, and God made a way for me to be back to Dominica, and we got to visit. And of course, we lost him a couple of years ago, and the grammar school students came together, and that was the starting of one of the grammar school groups, support group, and we've been looking out for one another and stuff like that. So, first form, for my first three forms, I was more or less, a class clown, and that's where my drawing was. And the older boys would say, draw this, draw that, and I would draw rude pictures, and they would look at it and say, oh my God, And one time, the teacher was wondering what this ruckus was all about, and she came and saw the picture, and
what teacher was that? What is that teacher?
I don't remember the teacher's name, but I do remember.
Male or female?
A female teacher, a rude picture of a female teacher. And I thought that was going to be, that was curtains for me. We are like the police chief, we're finished. But she saw the picture and she saw the likeness of her, and she was very impressed,
That wouldn't have been Cape Polydor, would it?
I don't quite remember. I don't want to call names, but but by the time I reached into third form, I read a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Robert Norman Vincent Peale. And that book made a great impression of me. And, I decided to, I can be a leader, and I determined that wherever I went, I would exercise my leadership abilities. And so by the time we went in fourth form, we went to St. Lucia with Olin Bully, was a dynamic young, charismatic and culturally inclined teacher. You have your story with him as far as the plays and the carnival and so forth. But he took us to St. Lucia on an educational tour. We raised funds, and that was something rather new in the Dominican context. And we wanted to do it again in the fifth form. And we were going to Barbados, but Mr. Bully could not go. And I said, well, I would take the boys? Well, of course, it was a team of us, but I think that, I did all the work, or most of the work. And I still can't imagine why parents would send their sons 16 years old on an overseas person with another 16-year-old. And without the internet, I don't know how we did it, but we had to, secure the school, raise the funds, buy groceries, have the itineraries of different places of interest to see. And I still believe that this is probably my greatest accomplishment in life.
So Sam, you at that time, how old were you?
I think we were 15 going on 16.
And what form were you in?
Fifth form.
And were you the head boy at the grammar school?
No, I was not. But I later became the president of the United Student Council, which was the heads of the head boys, head girls of the different schools. At that time, I was in the sixth form college.
So basically, you were the president of the first national student organization.
That's correct.
Which was later succeeded by the Dominica Federation of Students, which I became president of.
That's right. That's right.
Interestingly, I was after you left the presidency, the president became Anthony Richards, who is now a computer scientist in Baltimore County, and I became the PRO. And then it gave up the ghost and so on. But what is so interesting, Sam, is your outstanding leadership in taking a student group. I thought it was to Barbados, but you're saying it was to St.
Barbados.
Lucia?
We went to St. Lucia the previous year. Yeah, that's correct. We went to Barbados.
So when you went to St. Lucia, did you organize that as well?
No, we were all under the leadership of Mr. Alwyn Bully.
Alwyn Bully.
And that's where Bernard Shaw, Imani, Mother Cake, we would call him at that time, almost drowned in Veerfort. Now, we were on a raft out there in the sea, and we were just horsing around, throwing each other. And he was the only one who couldn't swim. He was on the shore. So I came up with a harebrained idea to bring him to the raft. And I recruited 3 other guys. So one under each arm and one holding each leg. And we were swimming out to the raft. And as we were going, one of the guys said, I'm tired, and I just left. And another one said, I'm tired too. I was under his right hand. Other one said, I'm tired too, and he left. And Bernard Shaw, Imani says, you're not holding me, man. You're not holding me. And he grabbed me around my neck. Oh, I wrote an article on that on the Dominica News Online called Stay Well and Sparkle, called Drowning. And both of us went under the water. And I've always heard that if a drowning man holds on to you, he's not going to let you go. And so we went under, we came up, went under, we came up. And I thought that was it. And then I saw Bevin Zamo swim out, with long, strong strokes, and he held Bernard Shaw by the neck and pulled him over back to shore. And I remember coming to the shore totally exhausted, knowing that my life was spared.
Oh, God. Zamo was quite a good swimmer then.
Yes, indeed.
Where was he from? He was from the West Coast.
Yeah, Collyho, I believe, yes.
So there are people who live by the sea. They live by the sea.
Yeah. Ezra Blundell would be one of his colleagues or friends.
Yes. You know what's interesting? After the Slave Emancipation Act of 1834, most of the freed Africans, I think Lennox Church again calls it the King's 3 chains. That is, they couldn't stay on the plantation and they went to live by the sea. And that's where the term came up, Neg Bord la Mer, which literally means Negroes by the sea.
At the seaside, yeah.
Yeah, Negroes by the seaside. So all the Dominican villages are on that piece of public land, like Mahos and Joseph, Collyho, Colibestry. They couldn't be on the plantation because that was private land. They didn't want to go to the mountain, which was rough and tumble forest, and they stayed by the sea in an area no more than half, 50 meters, 50 yards.
And what happens is that Dominicans have a very high level of the ability to swim. However, a lot of our African students at the medical schools in Dominica, they can't swim and they're actually afraid of the sea. They say, sharks and stuff like that. And also in Guyana, a lot of Guyana doesn't have that many beaches or places to, swimming in the sea is not a cultural thing in Guyana at all. So you find that a lot of Guyanese, and I may be wrong, but a lot that I encountered cannot swim or afraid of the water.
Yeah, well, in Guyana, the fresh water has what they call piranha, that eat you alive. So Guyana's waters are, first of all, I went up to Batica on a boat this past March, not this year, last year, March, right after before COVID, and it's all brown water, you know, it's coming from the Amazon. So it's not like Dominica. Dominica's water is like bottled water. You can see all the way down to the stones. But these rivers in Guyana are huge, but they're all brown. The water is not clean. You know, it's not clear.
What they lack in the water, they make up in the people. Absolutely amazing, you know, people. And my wife June is from Guyana.
Yeah. Guyana is
great quality people.
Guyanans are our most beloved friends. I mean, they're fun-loving, highly intelligent, beautiful, kind, and you know, just great people to be with. You know.
Yeah, very solid people. I think, you know, when I compare them to the Bajans, the Trinidadians, and the Jamaicans, you know, they're very serious, cultured people, and
yes.
that's my Guyana experience.
Yes. Not to say anything bad about our other island colleagues, but let's go on then to who was the principal at the Dominica Grammar School at the time.
Well, the principal was Mr. Goff. Well, we had before that the Bajan principal,
Cecil Goodrich.
Cecil Goodrich, who had this deep voice. You know, it was a voice from it's like the voice of God, and he smoked a pipe. He was very severe man, very severe man. But Goodrich was an Englishman, balding up front, black hair.
Goff, J.K. Goff.
Goff, yes.
He was a physicist.
That's right. And yeah, so he did very well. And you see, one of the biggest crises in my administration as president of the United Student Council, you know, there was a student rebellions or, you know, protests was very common in those days. And, you know, they had painted this big sign on the wall, this iconic picture, which I'm trying to locate, Goff must go, you know. And I didn't think Goff should go. I thought he was a really neat guy.
If you can stick a pin in that for a moment. Right behind you are several books. I think I can see the cover of one. If you look in the book Aboard the Comandante Pineras, which I think is next to the blue book In Search of Eden, there's a picture of Goff,
I think so,
and his son in that book. And there's a picture of you as president of the United Student Council with the sign Goff must go behind you.
And there on that
you want to just take the book out? It's right behind you. I can see it. Next to In Search of Eden, the blue book.
Okay.
Aboard the Comandante Pineras. I think it's the second or third chapter, DGS Days.
I think Dr. Bernard Wilshire was responding. I think you reported that about the Christian family, and he said, don't you know that they are family of teachers and a family of writers as well?
That's right.
So I think this is the book, this is the picture that you're talking about. Let's see if we can.
That's right. That's you sitting there, Sam, and below behind you, Goff must go.
Yeah.
That's right. And the picture of Goff is also in there. Aboard the Comandante Pineras by one Gabriel J. Christian. Never met him.
It's a great book, a treasure trove. Who would have thought? I've been looking for that picture, and I knew it was there somewhere, but I wasn't sure exactly where.
Yeah.
So, and I know the time is getting away from us, of course, and has gotten away from us. But
Sam, we're having fun, and I'm just so thankful to God that He has allowed us to live this long, to really make the record. So you first started off in 1968 or 69?
68, I believe, yes.
Yes. So when you started at the grammar school, then you would have been there when the expo took place then?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any, apart from Jogget, any memorable, well, you mentioned Jogget, Bevin Zamo. Tell me any more of the persons in your incoming class in 1968 that you can recall.
well, the dangers of missing some. There are several. Felix Wilson was my main rival, a very boisterous and vocal, muscular guy from Portsmouth.
Is that the famous Jabez? That was his nickname, Jabez. He studied science. He studied science.
Yes, indeed.
What did he study? What science? Physics or chemistry?
I think chemistry. He worked at, Dominica Coconut Products for a while, and then also was principal of the Dominica Grammar School, and also was head of the Dominica Olympic Committee. Billy Doctrove, international cricketer, Washburn Coffee, great agriculturist and cooperative man, David Edwards, Eliud Charles, attorney. Some of the others I haven't seen in a while.
Was Milton Lawrence in your class, or was he after you?
He was after me, I do believe, and so forth and so forth. But I apologize for those that don't immediately come to mind. But we have several of my dear friends, and we're very close. And we've, by the grace of God, I've done well. I've made our contributions in, and there's a song that we'd sing: when we have grown and take our place as men and women of our race. And we've seen that come to pass, and it's really wonderful to look back. But if I could just mention about being on the United Student Council. So from leadership of the United Student Council, I joined the National Youth Council and was voted in as Secretary General. Now, again, I tried to be very proactive and productive. And one of the things that we did again was to raise funds for a work camp. Now, in Dominica, if you tell people a lot of times to do things, people want to be paid because, and there are some sparkling examples of community consciousness that is not just limited to the day of service, okay, but that people go out of their way to work together as communities to help to upbreed their community. So that is what we're pushing. So we went to the Carib territory, now called the Kalinago, the Carib Reserve, now called the Kalinago territory. We raised the funds. We went out there and did community work, helped build roads, have cultural shows, work on the land, interact with the people. And we did the same thing at Petit Savan. So when the Petit Savan disaster, we made acquaintance, in 2015, Tropical Storm Erica, with several of the people that we worked with so many years ago. So those were my two main accomplishments in the National Youth Council, building up youth organizations and hosting the youth program on DBS called Motion with one Lemov Julian from the St. Mary's Academy, and the Sixth Form College by then. And, in those days when we would go out and do interviews on the tape, we'd come into the studio and we'd actually cut the tape with a razor blade and stick it with Scotch tape, to edit out the word.
Because that's a reel to reel. That's
reel to reel. Yeah. And
amazing.
Now we all do this digitally right now, but great time. At the Dominica Broadcasting Services. At that time, there was freer access to a wider range of people, not just limited to whoever is in favor with the ruling party. So we look forward for that time again.
Sorry, Sam. Let's be frank here and say that we have now moved from a democracy. So we had greater democracy under colonial rule when we had self-government in the latter years than now, which is really pretty much a one-party state. That if you're not favored by the ruling party, then you're persona non grata. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Oh, you will twist on the vine and perish. It matters not. A very heartless situation, but it's something that will come to pass. And when we don't want to look at it in isolation, we've seen that in many countries. You have places like Lebanon and Iraq, and what happened in Rwanda gives us great hope, that a country that went through this horrific genocide, I think, how many people? 800,000, a lot of people were butchered by their neighbors, and is now the shining star of Africa in terms of economic progress. And I saw a video about, you know, their community service and how enthusiastic they are about it. So it all has come from, you know, the quality of the leadership. Leadership that's interested in people, leadership that's interested in education, leadership that's interested in development. So that's where we are in Dominica. And so we think, you know, we've made our contribution, and we'd like people to remember and to recall, you know, what those contributions are and where we can be again.
Sam, before you, so you study at the grammar school, but by the time you're in fifth form, you have an orientation towards science. What were your favorite areas in the science category? Favorite subjects, I'm sorry.
Biology, chemistry, and physics. Okay. That was for advanced level.
And who were your science teachers? Any notable science teachers?
Well, we remember fondly Mr. Alexander, who was a plump guy. We would call him
Humpty.
Humpty. I wanted to say Stumpy.
As in Humpty Dumpty.
Humpty Dumpty, who sat on the wall.
Stumpy was an Angol guy who was born in England, I think.
Derek Angol, who passed away. That's one of our classmates who passed away, by the way. So yeah, so he was very much into, you know, he would have pop quizzes and he says, sink or float, you know, and he would say, oh, you know, another pop quiz. No, you know, he was very much, also had other teachers, you know, in that same chemistry lab, which I just today understood was put together by Dr. Clayton Shillingford from way back when. I'm not sure what's the status of the labs in Dominica now. I do know that the lab in the botanic gardens of the Ministry of Agriculture was totally destroyed by Hurricane Maria and has never been rebuilt. But so the focus was an interest in medicine. As a child, when I was would catch lizards, we strip the central vein from a blade of grass, form a lasso, and put that lasso around the neck of a lizard. We'd whistle, you know, and to charm the lizard, and then we'd catch lizard. And then I took one of those lizards. I wanted to dissect it. And I thought the safest place where I could do that, for whatever reason, well, because I needed my father's Gillette or daddy's Gillette razor blade. So I went in the bedroom behind the door while they were busy, and I slit did an incision on the chest and saw the beating heart of the lizard, and then took my mother, Nizel and Fred, from the same room, the parents' bedroom here, and began to sew it. And that was when our father saw me and said, what am I doing with this nastiness in the bedroom? And again, you know, I was waiting for the rain of blows. And then Ma intervened, and she said, Wendell, why you want to beat him? Can you see he's going to become a doctor? And anytime I was in areas, difficulty of self-doubt, nothing working out in terms of that, you know, I remember what's her words. You know, it was her prophecy that he's going to become a doctor.
Sam, you know, our mother was a very visionary person. Not only was she the manager of the workshop for the blind, she said to me she was one of the first or second Black people, because in those days, the British, Dominica, the British Red Cross was more or less, you know, the Roseau elite, you know, what they say, Mulat Roseau, the people of mixed British and African extraction. And we grew up in a house where she would go to the parades like National Day or Empire Day before that, or Discovery Day, with a uniform and a bag. And in that bag was smelling salts, mercurochrome, iodex, plasters, you know, different band-aids and so on. And in her drawer, her chest of drawers in a room with a mirror, wrapped in gauze, was a stainless steel and glass syringe. Remember that? That she used on occasion to give us injections in our home.
Yes,
I don't know
yes,
whether
yes.
there is any other parent in Dominica who had a syringe in their home to give their kids injection. She would get I guess, whatever it was she had to give us from somewhere. She'd inject us herself.
Yes, and she'd hold a needle in her hand here and slap it on the buttocks, and then
Yes.
attach the syringe and inject it. So you never felt the
Yes.
needle going in.
Yes,
You
yes.
know, you felt the
And
slap, but it confused that.
yes.
And then
I
the
think
needles, the syringe was sterilized.
yes, seriously.
Sterilized.
She'd boil it on the stove.
Uh-huh.
I remember boiling it. I remember her boiling both, because it was not a plastic syringe, it was made of glass and stainless steel. She'd boil it in a pot on the stove.
That's correct.
And then she'd take it out and use it. I mean, this is amazing. I just remember that now.
And there was never any infection.
Never an infection. You know, I guess what she was doing, Sam, was maybe if we had a course of medication, that instead of having us go to the hospital and get it, she would get it and she would administer it herself.
Yeah, because she was a nurse.
She was a nurse.
Yeah,
Yes.
I
You
also
know,
worked at a mental home.
yeah, she worked at the hospital and the mental home. You know, when I interviewed in Addis Ababa, the Dominican and Ethiopian Airlines Captain Ronald Hodge, who flies the 777 and 757 and 767. You know what he said to me? His mother worked as a nurse. He says he knew me because his mother worked as a nurse with our mother.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That was very interesting.
And of course, the mental home was part of Her Majesty's prison in those days.
It was St. Luke's mental home next to the prisons.
Well, we had to enter the prison compound.
Tell us about that, Sam, because
Yeah,
most Dominicans now may not know that.
You had to enter the prison compound, and so you and the rooms of the patients were cells, and there was a little opening behind the bars on the ground where you'd push the plates in with their meals. Yes. Yeah, so the acutely psychotic patients were restrained in the cells. They were incarcerated. And then they were used heavy-duty tranquilizers like phenobarbital. And there's another one that eludes me. But, you know, and those people, they were like walking zombies. It was what we call in medicine chemical restraints. It was just kind of knocked out. And there was very little psychotherapy. I mean, the psychiatrist prescribed the medication and authorized the, somebody being committed and all those different things. But as far as the severely mentally ill, it was very much a custodial type of care. But as the patients got better, Mom, as she was wont to do, helped them to transition back into society. There was no halfway house, or the social workers did not cover that. And so she would help them, do things and to make messages, groceries, and, to help out here and there. And so that she was very much involved in her work, not just the 8 to 4, so to speak, but she worked all different shifts. But besides, outside the shift, she also helped the mentally ill as well. And that gave me a great passion for those who were mentally ill. And so I became president of the Dominica Mental Health Association. And this is how it came to pass. I was very active, as I mentioned earlier, in the National Youth Council and so forth, and on radio all the time. And so I was going to a meeting and I could not find where it was. And I entered this building, this room, and they were having the annual general meeting of the Dominica Mental Health Association. And I said, oops, sorry, wrong room. And they said, no, come in. We need some young blood. We need, I said, no, I have another meeting to go to. And they, it's like the ancient mariner, the rhyme of the ancient mariner, where you had to stay to listen to his story. So I stayed, and they were having elections. And, they said, well, why don't you be on the executive? And, they elected me president of an organization that I walked into. And I was 19 years old at the time.
That's amazing.
I was 19 years old, and all the other people were over 40 years old. They were in insurance and this and that, Many of them mulattoes, as a matter of fact. And the Mental Health Association, the main thing was
when you say mulattoes, that is French Creole to mean mulattoes from Roseau.
Yeah, yeah.
And mulattoes are people who have mixed European and African extraction.
Yeah, half white, half black, you know, and for a little black boy, still 19 years old. And so again, that was a great achievement. And I got to represent Dominica at the Caribbean Federation of Mental Health, which was held in Guadeloupe that year. And I remember that was the first time I experienced hot water baths, being in a tub. And I remember the desserts, the peaches and all that stuff.
So I'm talking about that. Were you in Barbados or Bahamas?
It must have been Barbados. One of the people from Bahamas was one of the main friends that I met there. Yes, and so
was that the place where you came back? You had the cheese clad in red.
Ah.
I need to tell that story. So Sam went overseas as the delegate from Dominica of the National Mental Health Association.
Dominica Association of Mental Health, yes.
Association of Mental Health, Dominica Association of Mental Health. When he came back, he brought what I saw as red cheese, a red ball. He said, it's cheese. So I bit the cheese and I said, what kind of cheese is that? It has no taste. It was the wax around the cheese that you had to peel the wax away and you'd get the cheese beneath the wax. But
I think it's called Baby Bell cheese now, yeah.
Whatever it was called, it really made me feel foolish because I started biting the red, what I guess was wrapping, you know. I said, but that cheese is horrible. It has no taste. It was the wax. And the real cheese was beneath the wax.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
So that is my memory of your trip. I don't remember anything about the policies decided upon.
Well, the collective mental health of the entire Caribbean, I think, we think it raised all ships, you know. And
yes. So Sam, you know, what is fascinating is you served as the head boy at Sixth Form College. You're Secretary General of the National Youth Council. You organized a trip to St. Lucia and to Barbados. You organized a work camp that you did not really explore. And I want you to explore the work camp. And before you leave for the United States, you could become the president of the national. And it must have been that they knew about you somehow on radio and so on, because, and your family, of course, Dominica is a small country, they would not have just put anybody as the president. I guess at that time you were what, 19? Were you already a teacher at the Wesley High School?
Yeah, well, you know, how old were you when you started teaching?
18.
Okay, so I was 19 when I was teaching. I was teaching some fifth formers who were 16. So I was teaching at the Wesley High School, a wonderful 2 years.
What did you teach?
Well, I taught, I didn't say that like a teacher, but I taught geography, mathematics, and Bible knowledge. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's interesting that, you know, I learned a lot of things as I was teaching the Bible knowledge, you know, learning about the Northern Kingdom, and the Southern Kingdom of, you know, Judah and the various tribes. And it was a very wonderful, very interesting curriculum. Of course, it's a Methodist, but it was Methodists are very, they are mainline as well as being evangelical, based on the teachings and the ministry of John and Charles Wesley, who were very fervent preachers and reformists of the Church of England. And so I'm very, very partial to the Methodists. Of course, I grew up Catholic. We all grew up Catholic. Mom was Catholic and Dad was Anglican. And
tell us about that before you go back to the Wesley High School.
Yes, so you know, we didn't find much of a difference between the Catholic and Anglican liturgy, except that the Anglicans gave you wine, and that was
bread.
The bread.
Catholic Church only gave you dry bread.
Yes, yeah. Well, that they call lusty. Yes. And furthermore, I learned that the Anglican ministers had families. They got to marry, which I thought was another check in that box that was, you know, seemed to make more sense. But we were raised Catholic, First Communion, Confirmation, and at that time we had a very illustrious man with a golden voice, Jeff Charles, DBS or Windward Islands Broadcasting Services, WIBS at the time, which they brought the office, the studio was at the back of the Dominica Library, public library at that time, which has seen better times, has been burnt down again and again. And that's a sad story and a reflection, a barometer of the, level of seriousness as far as development is concerned in Dominica. That's another story. So Jeff Charles was the lector at the St. Alphonsus Church, announced the hymns and the announcements and so forth. So that's what I really wanted to that's what I was aspiring to. But I began to volunteer to read the Gospels, the readings. And that was a great challenge to get up there, in front of the church and to practice and to project my voice. So it was a great experience that I enjoyed thoroughly. But one of the things that happened at Wesley High School, I had a student by the name of Edith Scotland. And Edith Scotland was a very well-developed young lady, and she was the brightest kid in the class. And I was teaching a very difficult trigonometry class one time. And, didn't seem like anybody understood anything, because Edith came to me after the class and said, "Sir, could you explain such and such to me?" And I was so frustrated at the time. I said, "Just come back this afternoon and I'll explain it," because I had to rush over to another class. So when I came to the staff room, I waited and waited, and Edith never showed up. So I left Wesley High School, going down the hill by AC Shillingford. As I'm about to break the corner onto King George V Street, one of the students of the class saw me, and she said, "Sir, did you hear what happened to Edith?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Well, she drank poison and she ran by the jetty to throw herself in the sea. But when she saw how deep the sea was, she couldn't do it. And so she ran away. They caught her and they brought her to the hospital." So I went home. I thought nothing much of it. I thought probably, it was some hysterical gesture on her part. And, but I connected. I wondered, for several hours, I wondered what was she really trying to tell me? Because I found it strange, out of all people, Edith would come and ask me to explain that. So I think we're running low. I need to get charged. Maybe I should.
Yeah, why don't you get your computer charged? Do you have the battery for it?
I wondered what was her real problem. Maybe she was living with an adopted family. Her father worked for the town board, as we said in those days. And they were the town council, yes. And she lived with Mrs. Malalu, who was a mulatto in the interior of the valley. Anyway, whatever the reason was, we never know. But I said at 10 o'clock, I decided, let me go and see how Edith is doing. So I left Didi Lane, went up to the hospital at 10 at night. And there I saw her bound to the bed, hands and feet, in her nightie. She was writhing in pain, and she was bleeding from every orifice of the body, from her eyes, nose, ears, everything else.
No.
And parents were sitting down at the side there. And I remember I took the Bible, which I should have brought down, and I read the 91st Psalm to them, with them, and we prayed. And of course, they were very distraught. And, they said, they just wanted to thank me because, I was the only teacher who came to see her. Anyway, I went to sleep. It was very restless sleep. I kept waking up. I remember getting up at 5 o'clock and calling the hospital to see how she was doing. And they said that she had passed away. So it was very traumatic. This is the most traumatic experience of my
I'd never heard that before.
Teaching career. Yeah. So that was that. But
I had a situation myself where I was teaching in 81, and I fell off a balcony, with Leonie in Didi Lane, and she broke a neck. I almost broke my back, and I was off for about 2 weeks. And she was able to recover, and she was able to walk, but she lived with a limp thereafter, which was a big scandal, a big scandal, because people said all kinds of things. One Ma went buying fish once, at Portersville, and she heard a woman saying, "Oh, didn't you hear about this guy who he was living in a house with his wife and he beat her up, and then he broke in their clusters through the window and then took all the furniture in her house and brought to his mother's house." So my mother's listening to this. She said, "Who's that?" She said, "Didn't you hear that? Is that Christian guy?" "Oh, but aren't you his mother?" It was just a totally false story, you know.
It's
Anyway, but
amazing how the stories get spun out
oh
of
yes, but I'm so sorry, Sam. I never heard of Edith Ballard. Edith Ballard?
Scotland.
Never heard of that. She drank poison.
Yeah.
And that story you tell of bleeding out of every orifice is similar to the first big $1 million case I hit was Mr. Postel, who went to Kaiser. And he was poisoned. They gave him the wrong thing and he bled through every, ears, nose. And what causes that? What causes poison to have you bleed?
Well, the whatever poison it is, most rat poisons are anticoagulants. So they cause they cause internal bleeding. It's just the failure to clot, the blood just oozes out.
Nice.
Yeah, and well, you have that on a limited basis. If you take aspirin, aspirin will cause irritation of the stomach and bleeding from the lining of the stomach, to the point where it might burst through the lining of the stomach and first through the wall of the stomach, and you can have a ruptured pelvic ulcer, which is something that used to happen in those days of our training, but almost seldom happens today because, we've got such good medication. What you call acid reducers and H2 blockers, and all those things. So that's almost a disease of the past.
Yes. So you graduate, you teach at the Wesley High School, then you get to the United States. How did you get to the United States?
Well, I was teaching Sunday school at Deliverance Baptist Church. How did I get to be at Deliverance Baptist Church? Well, while I was studying for the sixth form, there was this Holmes Williams crusade, Christ is the answer, Pentecostal preacher out of Barbados. And as we talked about not too long ago.
I thought he was a white American from the South, Alabama or someplace like that.
Well, I don't know precisely exactly, but we can always find out. But I think he had some base in Barbados. So people coming from Mont Prosper on that truck, we had
Mont Prosper is a village in the heights of over Roseau.
That's correct. Had some people who were also on that same vehicle who were going to the cinema, and some people who were going to the crusade. Most people are going to the crusade. In fact, I interviewed the man who organized the trip, and he lost the brakes. It wasn't the regular driver; it was a brother of the regular driver, and he could not control. The vehicle was somewhat overloaded, and it went over off the road and fell into a precipice, for 100 feet down. And that was the greatest disaster in Dominican history. It made world news and BBC. And there are lots of stories we could talk for a long time about, the recovery effort. And this neighbor who lived in our lane for so long, he was a troubled guy, to have this outburst. I never knew that he was. It's only fairly recently that I found out, and I interviewed him, and he said that when they came looking for the bodies, they found him in a group of 9 bodies, and all the 9 around him were deceased, and he was alive. And he stayed in the hospital for about a month. He had bloodshot eyes, which probably from a skull fracture or something. And he said that when, without belaboring the point too much, that somebody said, one of the women in the truck said, whatever his name was, so you're going to kill us, as the truck went off the cliff, as it sped down out of control down the hill. And of course, she was one of the 34 people who perished, the majority of them. So we saw the bodies at the Red Cross, the newly built Red Cross.
That was the most traumatic day, up to that point in time, the most traumatic day in my life. It was 1975. I would have been 14 years. I was in 3rd form. And I remember nobody could go to the school. We went to school, but there was no school. Everybody, this whole country was in disorder. Because in those days, Dominicans died in 1s and 2s. You know, every day after lunch at 1 o'clock, the Dominica Broadcasting Service would come up with the news, and at the end they would play the Lord is my shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd, whatever. And they say we regret to announce the death of John Brown, otherwise known as Sacagawea, or something like that. And his auntie in New York and his uncle in England and so on in the Virgin Islands. And that would be it. If you had 2 people, that was maybe normal. 3 would be extraordinary. So in one fell swoop, 34, 35 people dead. So myself, Pat Paul, Bobby Shaw, and Mark Frampton, at one point at about 10 o'clock, we decided to take our shoes off, take our socks off, put our socks in our pants, in our pockets, put our shoes in take our shoes in our hand and cross the Rosa River in our uniforms up to Goodwill. When we got to the crest of Lindo Park, we saw about just people, maybe about 20, maybe a quarter of the population of Dominica was there. It's people milling around the headquarters because the mortuary had only 2 concrete slabs. The mortuary of Dominica's National Hospital had 2 concrete slabs, unrefrigerated. So the victims of that disaster were laid in rows on the tiled floor of the Dominica Red Cross headquarters. And there in that room was our mother.
Broken bodies.
Broken bodies, and they were
in
smelling like fresh beef. I'll never forget that. We kept cattle, we kept pigs, we kept chickens, we kept cattle. So we knew how fresh beef, slaughtered beef smelled. Broken human bodies smell like fresh beef.
And their bodies were in all kinds of grotesque
all mangled,
shapes.
man. You saw
Torn
bowels out,
clothing, mud and blood, mixture of mud and
blood.
blood. And, people walked by and saw
bones protruding, And there was your mother, our mother, helping to fix the people and straighten them out. So I went back to school after that. Then I came back with Wordsworth. Wordsworth was driving the car. And he said, go in and ask Ma if she's not coming for lunch. And she told us to go ahead. We went home. I could hardly eat lunch because I was upset. I left the food. I changed my clothes. I went back and looked at Ma fixing the bodies until it was time for the funeral. And I remember the Music Lovers, there was a National Day of Mourning, the Music Lovers band played. And I remember I followed the cortege going down the road from the hospital towards the Pentecostal church, all the way to the Goodwill School, to the left on Goodwill Road, and then I went back home. And for weeks on end, I would sleep with the lights in the boys' room on and read a comic until sleep beat away to my eyes. I couldn't dare put the lights off because as soon as I put the lights off, I would see the bodies in my eyes.
Well, that created, obviously, it was traumatic on everyone. And thanks for the description again. I had not fully captured what Ma's role was in that, but it created a firestorm in the religious
Just so the
community.
listeners to this audio know, she was at that time was one of the senior members of the Dominica Red Cross. So she was there in a uniform, gray uniform.
That's correct. So the religious firestorm that it created was that there was a controversy over who was saved, if those who were going to the crusade were saved versus who was going to the cinema. And the Dominica Chronicle wrote a scathing headline. The theme of the crusade was Christ was the answer. And Dominica Chronicle's headline said, death was the answer. And Dominica Chronicle is a Catholic run newspaper. And I thought that was in very, very poor taste. And I began to sympathize more with the cause of the crusade, and I felt moved. The verse at that time was, life is a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. And that I could see that for myself. And so I accepted Christ. I made an accepted conversion at that time. And so I went up to the People's Pentecostal Church. I'm not sure whether Pastor Bell was pastor at the time, but they told me I had to accept the Holy Spirit. So I Baptists. I didn't know about that. We were basically, you know, as we said already, very religious. And Lawson had been talking with a teacher, Miss Mills, who was witnessing to him. But in any case, I went up and they said, well, just raise your hands and say, oh, blah, 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 and hallelujah. So I heard people saying that. So I began to say that, and the deacon was holding me on my shoulder and squeezing me and telling me, yes, I'm getting into the spirit and so forth. But I was going to sixth form and I felt, you know, like I was an intellectual, and I wasn't, that part of it I didn't quite bargain for. But they were wonderful people. And when Lawson decided to get baptized with the Baptist church, I said, you know, I'll go with him. And that's how we both were members of the Deliverance Baptist Church. So I was teaching Sunday school there. And, you know, at that time, the people had to be buried the next day because, as you said, unrefrigerated. And we'll come to that, how, you know, I think the Lord used me to address that need in Dominica. I think the excavator just dug a trench, and the bodies were placed in there. So anyway,
they did make rough coffins from the
rough
United
coffins
States prison.
from the prison. That's correct. And so there was a Southern Baptist missionary had passed away in Dominica and was shipped to Guadeloupe for embalming, but because of the delay, the body was not, they only could have a closed casket by the time they got to the United States. And so the mission board decided that they could do with embalming, you know, help. And so get a lay missionary to go out there to teach embalming. So when he was there, Panic and Margaret Jennings, and he was at the Sunday school. Before that,
Margaret and Panic Jennings were American missionaries from Georgia.
From Georgia. And our local missionaries were Fred and Betty Walker from Illinois. At least one of them was I don't remember quite well. But what happened was that they knew I wanted to go to medical school, and because I didn't win the top scholarship, Island Scholarship, it would have been anyone's guess at that time as to whether I would get a scholarship or find some way, because medical school education is quite expensive. So in any case, he had met my father. He had met Daddy, our father, in Portsmouth, where he was in charge of the fire station there. And unbeknownst to us, Daddy had mentioned to him that he had a son who wanted to study medicine. And but anyway, while he was listening to me, Panic Jennings remarks to Betty Walker, our local missionary, that he speaks quite well. You know, he's just about the only one I can really understand here. Who is he? And she says, well, you know, this is Sam Christian, but he says it sounds very much like a fire captain. He calls him fire captain that I met at Portsmouth, as Mr. Wendell Christian or something. And Panic and Margaret, Sister Margaret says, well, that's because he's his son, you know. And so he said, yeah. He said, well, he told me that he had a son who wanted to go to medical school. And so they began talking, unbeknownst to me at that time. I remember he came up, you know, afterwards, and he shook my hand very warmly. He clasped my hands and he put his other hand over, and he looked at me straight in the eye, very warm, kind eyes. And I just felt a great connection at that time. And I didn't know anything about it until he had gone back and had done his arrangements. And then the missionary told me that Mr. Jennings, who had visited Dominica, and what he did, he was looking for an individual to whom his main mission was to bring an individual to the United States to teach embalming. And he identified, which I thought was the most gracious thing, Mr. Stanilius Coffey, who was the organist at the St. Alphonsus Church, Catholic Church, and also was the chief pharmacist at the hospital at the time. He thought that he was the most capable individual, and he's also the father of Young Bull of Bullseye Pharmacy, a great friend of mine, a very talented individual. And so we both went up to the United States about the same time, and many people thought I had gone up to do embalming, but I they brought me to Rome, Georgia, and I studied at Shorter College in Rome, Georgia. Majored in biochemistry, spoke to about 66 churches in Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Most of them, I was the very first Black person to enter that church.
So these were white American missionaries from the South, and so their relationship was not to the Black church community, but to the white church community. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So in the United States, the Baptist churches that are white are mainly white, and the Baptist churches that are Black are mainly Black.
Very much so. 10 o'clock is the most segregated hour in the United States. And so
10 o'clock on Sunday.
At least
10 a.m. Sunday morning.
10 a.m. Sunday morning, yes. So anyway, it was a wonderful experience, very educational in many ways.
Stick a pin in that, Sam, and tell me about the quality of the labs in Dominica that you were familiar with, and who was the lab technician at the time at the grammar school?
I don't remember his name. The labs were very high quality. I remember the first experiment demonstration that was done was taking a piece of sodium and putting it in water, and it exploded and was, you know who did that?
You know who did that? Is a vet in New York, Long Island. Rosie Douglas's brother, Atlee Douglas. We're in first form doing general science in the old technical wing. And he brings in a bucket of water, puts it in the front of the classroom, and throws something, and it explodes, and he runs away. So we start running away as well. If the teacher is running, the students must run. And it was a prank, sodium, and boy, we were afraid that we don't know what the heck that was. They started smoking and made that noise.
Well,
why is that chemical reaction? What causes that chemical reaction with H2O and SO2?
H2O making sodium hydroxide, but it's a very exothermic reaction. It generates heat, a great deal of heat, and in the form of an explosion. But talking about running away and other people running away, that reminds us, without being morbid, but in the dead room, somebody was brought in from Carnival. He had collapsed from acute, probably alcohol poisoning, and they thought he was dead and was placed in the dead room on that same slab that you talked about. And because it was an unsolved case, the body had to be guarded until, cause of death was determined by the pathologist. Well, the guy wakes up in the dead room and he pushes his hand this way and he feels a cold body, He feels a cold body. He sits up and looks and says it's a dead man there. So he pops out of the dead room, and the policeman who is guarding, sees the dead man. So the policeman takes off, and the man later said, if the policeman is running, then things must really be bad. He kept running in the same direction of the policeman, because the policeman must be nowhere.
Oh my goodness. Dominica is full of jokes, It's not the same time they had the famous vampire wine.
What's that?
One year, some unscrupulous merchant brought into Dominica something called vampire wine.
Yes.
And all the revelers in Carnival had their lips stained red. It was very potent wine, put you down flat.
Oh, I see. Okay, but you see, there's a connection.
Yes. I remember that story. I remember that was a very famous story. The guy is running and the guy is running. They're both running from. They're both running from. The policeman is running from the dead man, and the dead man is running faster because he sees the policeman running. Anyway, life, that's when you don't have any sort of scan or any sort of protocol. You don't breathe hard enough, you're dead. And let God sort you out.
Well, in fact, and that whole the funeral culture at that time was, you had to be buried within 24 hours. So the coffin makers were, on call. You needed the height, you needed the size of the person, make a coffin, quick. Have it ready.
Yes.
And the
The well-to-do, I remember, the well-to-do had the coffin stained and vanished.
Yes.
You had to do it quick with silver handles and so on. The less well-to-do had coffins covered in either white cloth or purple cloth. It was a special coffin cloth. I guess they got from the UK or something. It was mainly purple. Mainly
And
purple.
depending
So
on what time of the day that the person died and the funeral was going to be, you know, their standard funeral times in the afternoon or something like that, they would put a slab of ice on the person's chest.
That's right. Or stomach.
Yes.
In those days, we had an ice factory where you could have big blocks of ice. So they'll take an ice pick, and break it in big chunks in an enamel basin and put it on your stomach to kind of chill you. And you'd sometimes put, I remember in Pong, the little modest dwellings there next to the mixed school, you'd also put a basin beneath the bed. So you'd have cool air coming from above and cool air coming from below, right? And you must know, Sam, in those days, I saw it several times. If you're going to the countryside, we had no funeral home. So if the family came to take you, they would wrap you like a mummy. I remember seeing once coming on Stevens Street, someone in the back of a pickup truck, a body wrapped like a mummy. They'd wrap you all the way like a mummy, so you could be transported to your home in the country. And I guess when you got there, they would take it out and dress you.
That's right. So, you know,
I guess it was also a way of not letting out fumes or exhaust, because the people, there was no preservation like formaldehyde. So by wrapping you like a mummy, just to keep you together from maybe expectorating or what have you.
So, you know, there are no funeral homes. So, you know, you lay in state in your house. So in the living room of the house, we converted into a stateroom, white sheets again on the wall.
And they bring the bed into the drawing room.
The bed into the drawing room, and ferns and other religious iconography on the walls.
Sam, it's interesting you said that. There were special plants used for that purpose. There's a particular very frail, thin, and pungent fern that I would see growing around by the cemetery. I don't know whether it's because when they would bring some of the stuff there, the seeds would fall there. And that's what you would have around the house.
That's correct.
Yes. I can't remember the name of it. You know,
yeah,
all those things
and it had to be done quickly by people who were experienced, because before rigor mortis would set in. It's one thing to dress a sick person, and it's quite another thing to dress a dead person. It's not anybody who could do that. So there are people who were in the community who would be able to do those things. So anyway, the other thing that Mr. Jennings did through the Southern Baptist Mission Board was to furnish a chill box. And that chill box, which I delivered to the government of Dominica at the ministry, made it possible to put an end to next day funerals. Because a lot of times people from if you were in, you know, the big countries, forget it. But for relatives who were living close by, who could get there the next day, oftentimes the casket would be lowered, coffin would be lowered and being lowered into the ground, and the person would be bursting through, coming from the airport, just making it at that time. So nowadays, with the embalming, and at first was Liners, and now we have Gentle Rest and Northeast, and they all provide very excellent service. Bodies can be kept as long as they can.
Months.
Yeah, the deceased
Patrick John died.
Yeah, Patrick John died in, I think was at least 2-3 months. And Dr. Kelsick also, there were some questions about surrounding his death, and you know, they had a second opinion, pathology examination, and so forth and so forth. So
what is the ultimate diagnosis, if you don't mind me?
I do not know. I've been in touch with his brother, Dr. Wilbur Kelsick, who is the doctor for the Canadian Olympic team. In fact, I spoke to him while he was in Japan at the last Olympics concerning another tragic death in his family. But it's been the family had a very difficult time trying to get to the bottom of what exactly happened. So I don't want to speculate, but it's something that was, you know, litigated in the court of public opinion very much. Let's put it at that. And it was was a highly trained doctor, He had board certified in general surgery, orthopedic surgery, and vascular surgery, and came down and, had difficulty.
Where did he study, Sam? Was he a
Oh,
student?
a number of different places. I don't remember offhand, but that's readily accessible. And but he had difficulty getting to put his skills into practice, which is a common thing that we see. If the person
whenever you're a doctor from Dominica of African descent primarily, but a doctor who does not reside in the good books of the government, you're basically ostracized. And they do all they can to basically frustrate you and deny you privileges and access to the hospital system. Is that the same Celtic, by the way, whose brother was the pharmacist at D.D. Lane when we were growing up?
I believe so. They're a very upstanding and very highly trained family by and large. His sister June is also, I believe, a doctor of nursing in somewhere in Texas as well. So Celtic family, very outstanding family. But yeah, so that was Georgia. How
did you compare the labs at the grammar school to the labs at Georgia? Were they,
they were equivalent. They were equivalent. They were very, very, very well equipped, At the time, I have no idea what they are now. I doubt they are as well equipped as they are now. In fact, I think Convent High School would come to the labs in grammar school for certain, for chemistry at least. Very interesting time.
Yes, I remember we had Corbett was the lab technician when I was there, and he was very competent. And so the lab technician had his own office, and they really kept the labs. I remember we would get the, rabbits and other things to other biological, samples, specimens in formaldehyde, wrapped in packaged in formaldehyde from England, and do that, aphids and different things. So it's very, very, very sophisticated. And I just wanted to know, having gone to science college, having gone to a US College for Science, biochemistry, and Howard University Medical School, you had an exposure to labs and lab science. And I just wanted to know what your comparisons were, considering what you knew at the grammar school.
Yeah, well, as I said, grammar school was very well appointed. The labs in the medical school, of course, is anatomy, human anatomy, and that is at a different level altogether. So.
Yes. So how did you get to Howard University Medical School in Washington, D.C. in 1980?
Well, first of all, I was the first Black student to graduate, to enter medical school from that university. And
when you say that university, you mean Shorter College?
Shorter College in Rome, Georgia.
Yeah. What percentage of that school was Black?
Well, it probably about 10%, and they were mainly in the sports management and the sports teams, education, not very much in the sciences. So what would happen was that I would try to sit with my science colleagues sometimes in the cafeteria. I would start to sit with my Black brothers and sisters sometimes. So, but when I would come over to sit with the Black students, they'd say, "Oh, so we're good enough for you?" And, so I had to deal with that kind of little bit of resentment. But I tried to straddle, the line, and was very good. But one of the interesting things that happened was in economics. I loved economics, and we had a professor, a young, dashing guy with a big platinum hair, and but he looked like he was from a bigger city. He didn't talk like the Southerners did. And what happened was he would like to announce the results of the quiz. So he would announce them from the number 3, number 2, and number 1. So the first quiz, and he said in first place is Sam Christian with 100%. And the next week we had another quiz, and it come up and again, second place. And in the first place is Sam Christian with 100%.
Amazing.
And then on the third week, he had another quiz, and he said, and in number 1 place is none other than Slamming Sammy Christian. I like to sit up front. So I'm the only Black boy in the class. black student in the class, and all around me are white students. I feel like that's daggers in my back. I said, that's not good. Didn't like that. I say, well, the next week I'm not going to get 100, you know. So I actually compromised so that I wouldn't be the center of attention. But he called me into the office and he says, you know, I can arrange an economics scholarship for you, you know, because you're really good. I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to medical school, you know. And he was a little bit disappointed, but you know, he was very fond of me, and so I had a great time.
So Sam, did you stay on campus?
Huh?
Did you stay on campus or you stayed with Jennings?
I stayed on campus. Yes, I stayed on campus.
How far was that from Jennings' home?
Oh, probably about 3 or 4 miles or 5.
Oh.
I had a put, you know, the distances at that time. I remember once when you know, we would go up to we could have meals on. We stayed at an old dormitory called Greystone Dormitory, which was an old hotel, a grand old hotel from back in the day, 5 floors. And so on the weekends, you know, the buses didn't run very often. So it was a couple of miles. I could walk it. And I was coming back from the campus back to the dormitory. And the basketballers were driving by and they offered me a ride. So I came in and I was sitting in the middle, you know, 2 at the front, 2 at the back, and I'm in the middle at the back. And that's when I really realized how huge these guys were, you know. And they took out the spliff and they started to smoke, you know, and they offered it to me. And well, I told you already the reaction, you know. I said, oh boy, you know, if I don't take this, you know, they're going to think I'm real snob, you know. So I did, you know, I just did a little something, you know, and that was it. But afterwards, I was in just sheer panic. I said, but if I get caught, that's trouble, because I might be, you know, expelled, I might be sent home, I will break everybody's heart, you know, and so forth. So I said, you see that, you know, next time I have to learn to say no, you know. And so that was my experience on that point in time.
Yeah. What kind of meals were served you at the cafeteria?
Well, you know, coming from the islands, the meals were great. You know, I would listen to the students complain about the meals and I say, what they're talking about. I came into the at 165 pounds, 6 foot tall, 165 pounds. At the end of the first semester, I was 180 pounds. So I gained 15 pounds in the first semester. I was taking a weight training course. So a lot of that was muscle, but some of it was not, you know. And all the servers were Black. And I had that maternal attachment. I saw my mother in them, and they treated me the same way. You know, they would always, when I come with my tray, you know, they always put more for me, you know, and they'd tell me to come back for seconds.
You know, I had that same experience. My first job, you know, was at Litton Systems Amicom, a defense contractor in College Park, not far from where the Tuskegee Airmen meet. And I was favored to have been the mentee of Rear Admiral William Ryle at the Defense Logistics Agency. He just called and said, my president of my procurement club is coming for a job tomorrow. Thank you very much. That's it. And I just went and got a job with my first carload, my first credit card from Litton Credit Union.
Wow.
And all the servers were in the cafeteria were Black. And I was one of maybe only 2 Black people in finance. Property management and finance were in the same building. And whenever I'd be putting my tray, they would look and they'd always put extra, and I felt bad because I could see them putting extra in my plate. So there's something to be said about solidarity, you know?
Yeah, that's a way they could strike out, you know, and a little blow for freedom right there every time. I could never call, if I missed meals and the cafeteria is closed, I would come and knock at the back door, you know, and they would wrap something out for me, and you know.
So what were you getting to breakfast?
Say, oh, you know, the cafeteria is closed, you won't be able to get anything. I would wait until the white students are gone. I'd go knock at the door and they would sure get me some stuff.
So what did you get for breakfast?
Well, grits. I learned to eat grits. You can't be a Southerner and not eat grits, which was like cornmeal without white cornmeal that didn't have much.
Without
taste.
Sugar.
Yeah, it was interesting stuff, but you know, you made do. But they're all good stuff. It was all
grits and eggs or grits and sausage.
grits, eggs, sausage, whatever.
And to drink?
Yeah, well, juice, iced tea, hot chocolate.
That's when you first had iced tea, right?
Right. And
Iced
then,
tea with lemon.
discovered IHOP. You could go and have breakfast any day, any time of night or day. I thought that was so brilliant. I said, what a great country this is, because I liked eggs. I could go and get a grand slam breakfast, 3 eggs. 3 eggs.
3 eggs.
Back home, it was half an egg. You're lucky if you get half an egg, or scrambled 2 or 3 eggs for the 7 children.
Yes. You get a spoonful of egg. You're big. So for lunch, what would you get for lunch?
Meatloaf, chicken. Well, there's not much rice, but macaroni. Just the usual stuff. It's good stuff.
So when you went to the different churches, Sam, were you going there to get donations for your high school? I mean, your college, your med school education?
Well, it was not. Basically, Hurricane David had occurred, and Panic Jennings had slides from the hurricane destruction. There was a particular slide that he loved, which American flag standing out of the debris, just like you had out of 9/11 debris. And he liked to talk about that's the Cuban or the communists. Was that after Grenada? No. But
Grenada was 79.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you were still at George. You're still at
Yes. Yeah. So it's talking about the appealing to American patriotism, that by helping Sam, you could help prevent communist takeover in Dominica. So let's help Sam go to medical school so he could go back and help his people. That was always the pitch, so he would present and I would talk, and it was a great experience, but always a gospel message, a missions message, spreading the gospel, going to all the world and bring the gospel to all people. That's what we did.
Yeah. So when you came to Washington, what month, what year?
So they packed up my few belongings, and with Billy, Billy would call me the Juice, by the way. Billy was the husband of Margaret's sister, Betty. And Billy was a good old boy, wore cowboy boots, very lean, chain smoker, wonderful heart.
What did he do, Billy?
Well, he was man around, he basically, I don't know whether he had any, but, I don't know his.
I met Billy, Sam. I broke a tooth.
I know you did. I know you did. Yeah.
Yeah, you sent me to Georgia on the Greyhound bus in 1983. And I went down there, and the guy worked with me, gave me sleeping gas, not laughing gas for the first time I used that. It was very pleasant. I didn't feel any pain. Yes, and I jumped on the tractor the next day and mowed the lawn, I had fun doing that. And Billy sat there, we looked at TV, said, he looks like Sam. He looks like the Juice. But when he said the Juice, he meant you. Because I didn't know what they meant until later I learned it was O.J. Simpson.
Uh-huh.
They meant because they liked O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson had been a football player of the Buffalo Browns, something like that, Buffalo Bills, whatever, and they called him O.J. Orange Juice, the Juice. Yeah. And I guess they were never that close maybe to black people, so all black people look the same. But look at him; he looks like the Juice.
Yeah, he had this famous ad of jumping through airports, an ad for Hertz, because you could get your car and so forth, and so that was the situation there.
How did you pack up? You pack up and drove all the way to DC?
They drove me. Yeah,
Billy or Panic?
Margaret Jennings did, and Billy. Yeah, they dropped me off on 407 U Street in Washington, D.C. It's the old rickety house. Now, coming from when I stayed with Panic Jennings and over the holidays, and that's when I would have peach cobbler with ice cream after every meal, dessert, ice cream, and it was very sumptuous.
You live in the lap of southern luxury.
Yes.
Because Panic was a prominent citizen. He was a funeral home owner.
And descendant of funeral home owners, so they were well established. Jennings Funeral Home was probably the leading funeral home in the area. Yeah,
and that's Rome, Georgia.
And he also had organized a annual gospel concert called Hymns of the Christian Faith. Yeah, and that was a big thing. He had a Sunday morning program. He went in at 7 o'clock on the radio and had Hymns of the Christian Faith. And I duplicated some of that work to some extent in some of my programs in Ohio. So he's a remarkable individual, really loved people, and made great contributions to Dominica. And I just happened to be part of the channel for that.
Yes. So and God bless him and Margaret and the family and Dr. Roberts and the others. I hope that one day we can go to Rome, Georgia, and visit some of your, old hunts, the Greystone Hotel, and Shorter College. So Sam, in Washington, how does Washington then compare to Rome? And what do you find different?
Well, it's big city. So I was proud to be a little bit more than a stone's throw from the White House, where everything happens. Very proud to be at Howard University, where people are very confident compared to in the South, where everybody knows their place and try not to get out of bounds.
And just so the record reflects the reality of things, Howard University at that time was considered the Black Harvard in the world. There were many famous Black people in the school. And it was founded by Union Army General Otis Howard, who had lost his arm, and who was an abolitionist. And he was also the first director of the Freedmen's Bureau. So that's why the first Howard University Hospital was actually called Freedmen's Hospital. So he was a very progressive white person who wanted to expand higher education for African Americans. So,
excuse me.
So you're in Howard, and what about Washington, D.C. and its Black leadership?
Which was Howard, also the alma mater of Vice President Kamala Harris, by the way. So the leadership of Mayor Barry, I think, was there at the time. Very illustrious individual, highly regarded, almost couldn't lose an election, had his own pitfalls, but that's another story. So what we found was that there's underlying people in Washington, D.C., Black people were, like Black people all throughout the United States, were oppressed and segregated and what have you. But people coming from the Caribbean and Africa seemed to, a lot of them, we couldn't tell whether they were ambassadors, and in certain establishments where the local Blacks could not enter, the foreign Blacks would have a little bit of access. Was that your understanding of how it was in that time?
Yes, as a matter of fact, one of the reasons they moved towards desegregation was there was an incident where Howard students dressed up as Africans in robes and went to a white hotel and started talking nonsense, and they served them. And after they served them and they had rooms the next day, they started laughing and speaking English. And it was a big scandal because you saw how stupid it was. So Eisenhower and the guys actually were said to have spoken to Chief Justice Earl Warren and says, look, we're fighting a Cold War. We're trying to appeal to the emerging nations. The Soviet Union and China will eat our lunch because they're going to say, look, your diplomats come to Washington and they cannot be treated as equals. And so they could not have a separate policy for Blacks who were diplomats and Blacks who were local. So they sped through desegregation. That desegregation was not simply the result of civil rights protests in the United States. It was also a result of realpolitik, as Kissinger liked to call it. The politics of reality, that the reality was, it was injurious to US foreign policy and its image in the world to have Americans of African descent be discriminated in that way. It would just not be good. in that global competition. So, that's why it's so important to always see your struggle in a global way. And that's what Rosie Douglas was so good about, as opposed to be parochial, that we're all human beings. And the struggle for freedom and justice is a universal struggle. It's not something insular.
And so, Caribbean people have been very much in the forefront and leadership of moving the herd forward, so to speak, of this desegregation and of equal rights.
Rosie Douglas in Canada at the George William University in 1969, leading that uprising. And Stokely Carmichael, who was from Trinidad, leading, the student nonviolent students, Southern Christian Leadership Council, and being part of SNCC, Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee with John Lewis and the others, and who was the first person to utter the word Black Power when Martin Luther King was talking about, civil disobedience and so on. Michael was fed up. He says, Black Power, we want Black Power. And so West Indians, as you rightly said, have always been, very keen in their
from Marcus Garvey way back,
yes,
to Barbara Jordan.
Yes. Well, Barbara Jordan was not a West Indian descent. She was from Texas.
Who was is there a Caribbean woman?
Shirley Chisholm.
Shirley, yes. Shirley
Chisholm, yes.
Hmm.
She was the first serious African-American female candidate for president of the United States. There had been others. Angela Davis, for instance, but she ran on the Communist Party ticket, so she never gotten far. But Shirley Chisholm was considered very serious, and she actually spoke at the convention, I believe, in 72, one of those years.
72, I believe.
Yes, and the first Secretary of the Army of Color was Clifford Alexander. Was that Clifford Alexander? And then you had, of course, Colin Powell, who passed away recently, Secretary of State. And, on and on, you've always, sorry?
And Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, yeah.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, so you've got a lot of West Indian leadership in the United States and so forth. So you graduated in 1984 and you got married to June Rosamond Olivier Henry, J-R-O-H.
You remember that? Got married, graduated in the morning and got married in the afternoon.
That's right. And I just want to commend you, Sam, and salute you on behalf of Esther and Hildreth for having opened the way. You were the first of the family to go to the United States in 1977. I was the second. You made a way for me to come to the United States, and you got me admitted to Southeastern University. In 1982, I came up December 1982, and you came with June to National Airport to pick me up. And we took the yellow line to Gallery Place, which is dark and foreboding. And now it's, like Times Square. And because it was still suffering from the riots of '68 after Dr. King was assassinated, that area had been partially burnt down. And then we took a taxi cab. I remember that's when I first realized a lot of the taxi drivers were either Iranian, Nigerian, Ethiopian, or Ghanaian. A Ghanaian taxi driver took us up to Quincy Street. And I stayed with you and June from December 27th, 1982 through September 1983. In May, I got my first job at the Circle MacArthur as a ticket usher. The first movie I ushered was Return of the Jedi. And $3.65, Sam, and cotton tickets. And Esther's first job, that was my first job, and that was Esther's first job. When Esther came in '84, I got her a job there in the concession stand. Esther was selling popcorn and soda. And I remember sometimes Esther would bring home, at the end of the night, you can't save the popcorn because it gets robbery. So they'd throw it. But instead of throwing it, she'd put it in the trash bag and log onto the bus, a big trash bag of popcorn. And all week, we'd put the popcorn in the oven, we had an oven, and we'd put the popcorn in the oven to kind of get crispy again, and we'd be eating popcorn all week. And then when you go to the loo, there's no substance, it's just, you have the Mexican Revolution. You have the Mexican Revolution. Yes, and then also we would go to a cheap store called Morris Steak, and you get no name soda. It would just say cola. It would just say orange. It would just say lime or lemon. And when that would be finished, we would take the liter bottle, to the concession stand And before she left, she'd put soda into that bottle, close it, and bring it home. But soda from the soda fountain at the thing is to be used right away. It doesn't have a lot of fizz as soda in a bottle or can. So a couple of days after that, if you use that, the fizz will be gone. So the only way you can get soda to get back fizz, you put ice in the shake. And you can get some, make it palatable, because it's just like sweet water, you know.
You didn't have a fridge in those days.
Oh
In
yes.
the first days.
Well, I don't know, but when I came to Quincy Street, you had a fridge, and then when I left and I went to the rooming house, there was a fridge, but it was a communal fridge. So the first time I put groceries there, the next day it disappeared. Everything disappeared. It was a fridge with a bottomless pit, you know. They took all my stuff, so I had to invest in dry goods. And in the winter, I made an igloo to put some frozen stuff. But other than that, it was all dry goods, you know. And I had to sleep with my shoes on because there were rats there. It was tough living. But that year, Sam, 83, December,
83.
I got a scholarship from the Organization of American States, a fellowship. And I would get all my school fees and $500 in those days, a lot of money, a stipend, and that allowed me to move back to Quincy Street, where the rent was $250 for the efficiency, $250.
$250.
And yes, and I was able to take that efficiency. So when Mom and Dad came for your wedding in '84, they stayed with me upstairs, you know. And Esther, when Esther came, she stayed with me. And of course, we kept working, you know, so I didn't give up my job at the cinema and then later at the restaurant. And so I had the stipend money, plus I had my regular money from part-time work, and you know.
So when did you work at the docks, at the marina?
So I worked at, my first job was at Circle MacArthur from 1983 May through the end of summer. Then the end of summer, I worked at Newsroom Cafe from 83 September through 84 April, May, and then I worked at Kramer Books and Afterwards Cafe Restaurant again from May 84 through maybe the first week of October 84, and then I started working at the Capital Yacht Club from about October 84 through the end of summer 85.
And so what were your duties there at the yacht club?
I had 80 boats, 4 docks, 20 boats per dock. Every hour, walk the docks, maintain a logbook, which I did with a degree of flourish and highfalutin English, and they loved that. All boats at rest, easy calm, all quiet on the Potomac, boats at rest, no lines, no loose lines. Light breeze, you know, and I was better educated than all the guys there, you know. I had been a teacher already. I was at college. I was a who's who in American colleges and universities. I was on the dean's list, and you know, I think they knew that I was someone. And on lunch break, I would walk up to the Smithsonian and quickly look around, and there were guys who were born in Washington working with me who had never been to the Smithsonian. I never forget it. I always encourage them to go. The Smithsonian museums were free and still are free. And then I would also have to take all the trash from the boats. I had a big cart with 2 bicycle wheels. I had to lug trash to the dump and sometimes clean up and take the electric meter and water meter, you know. And so it was hard work sometimes, you know, carrying trash. Sometimes the trash bags burst, sometimes they fall. I don't remember having gloves often, my bare hands. You know, it was humbling work, you know. I used to be afraid sometimes in the good weather, the spring or the nice autumn day, that somebody from school would see me, you know, carrying trash. But, you know, I think it made me a much better person. It made me appreciate the value of work, of hard labor, you see? And that's where I bought my first car, a Mach 4, Mustang Mach 4, 1974 with a Duesenberg top, peeling Duesenberg top, velour on the inside of the seats, blue velour, but the top was peeling, a Duesenberg, a leatherette top, half leatherette, and it was peeling. So the guy said $500. I said, okay, I only have 400. He took it for 100. I promptly took off to Georgetown to show off, Esther and I to show off about the bright lights, and the car promptly installed bad battery. I was in the car in cold weather, and you helped us out. I think you had a car or something, and we went to Sharp Auto. That was the place, and we got a battery. And that car served me for about a year. I went to New York with it. When Nicole, I think, was in an accident, I drove up to New York, Esther and I think there's a little bit of a hole in the flooring. So the cold air was coming through the floor. Spit into New York, And Sam, but something was wrong with the brakes once. I was going down in the weather on Georgia Avenue, Silver Spring, and I hit the brakes, and the car did a 360.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 180. It spun around.
Black ice.
Yeah, spun around 180. And another time I slid on black ice and hit somebody behind. And do you know, the lawyer who sent me a letter, I became a lawyer and had him in a deposition. He was on the other side. Yes.
What?
So those are the days, and we stayed at Quincy Street from December 82, right behind the Kaichi nightclub, run by Royston de Souza of Guyana, to September of 83. Then Euclid Street from September 83 to May 84, back to Euclid, back to Quincy Street from May 84 through May 88, when Esther graduated, and then we moved to College Park, Maryland, in Prince George's County, where we still are now in Prince George's. Of course, we stayed in an apartment at Sarah Hill Road until 90. We bought a house at 990, and that's where
Kettering
died. Kettering Place. That's I think we're the first in the family to buy a house. Esther and I, and Zip died in the house that we owned. He died within 10 days of our moving there. We moved there on May 31st, 1990. He died June 9th, 1990. So he died within 10 days. Once he went up the stairs, he never came back down the line. Yeah, that was a great loss. Great loss. Sam, we've covered a lot of ground, but I want to close by asking you a few questions about your family. June, your marriage, June, on your graduation day, Kwame and Kobe, and a brief bit about Ohio, and just a few last remarks.
Well, of course, I spoke about June earlier and her contribution to the struggle, getting me through, helping getting me through.
And June was born in Guyana and was the daughter of the cabinet secretary to President Forbes Burnham of Guyana. Her father is Oscar Henry. He's in his 90s now, high 90s, and Oscar Henry. I have to give him a call. I must give him a call sometime this week, see how he's doing, if he's lucid to take my call. But very fine gentleman, very fine family, very distinguished family, actually. Her brother Ozzy was, I think, an economist.
Mm-hmm.
Her sister,
Saskatchewan, Regina.
Yes, her sister
Beverly,
I think, was a biologist.
No, she's a business. Had a business degree.
Her brother Peter, I think, is an engineer, a mechanical engineer.
Yes.
And of course, June is a PhD in nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so you got married and had two kids, Kwame the first, and Kobe.
That's correct.
And of course, I'm happy to say I'm Kwame's godfather. He was born in September 1988 when I was at Georgetown University, and I came up to New Jersey for the christening. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's when I met the Surus.
Yes, yeah, a lovely guy and his family.
Yes.
So they're doing well in Ohio now, and so after internship at the District of Columbia General Hospital, where among other things, there's a knife and gun club in Southeast, a lot of violence. So we had a guy who was shot in the head, and the neurosurgeon came in, and I was the person on call. I think I was a student actually, rotating in one of the hospitals in DC, and when Providence Hospital actually. So when he opened the skull at the top here, the brain began to ooze out, and somehow we didn't expect that. And just like you're squeezing a tube of toothpaste, and he put his hands on it, and then he stopped to gather himself. And he took my hands and he put it on it. I says, hold this there. And he stepped back and he went to think and, and went over and spoke to the anesthesiologist and, told them to give some, well, probably mannitol, which is a drug that draws fluid to help shrink the brain. So I had to be holding my hand on the scalp there. He had shaved the hair off and to keep holding, until the medication took work. But another interesting medical experience I had was when I was in residency in
Did that
New
guy
Jersey.
survive, do you know?
I didn't know because I left, but he probably did not. If he did, probably had some deficits, some serious deficits. But when I was in New Jersey rotating, on the heart surgery program. So at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when I was on call, and the fellows who are the doctors who are training, subspecializing in surgery, 3-year program, subspecializing in heart surgery, they had gone home. So a transplant came in. They had to go to Pennsylvania to pick up a heart. So I was the only person there. And so they took us to Newark Airport on a Pan Am helicopter, flew all the way down to Pennsylvania in a rural airstrip, and the police car was waiting. We got on the police car, rushed to this hospital where the patient was in surgery, brain dead. It was a young lady, 26 years old, who had ejected through the windshield, not wearing a seatbelt. And so there were other teams, some to have his eyes, some to have his kidneys, and whatever. We were coming for the heart. And so we clamped the heart off, put it in the saline bag and put it in the red and white cooler, got on that police car, went to the airport, flew back to New Jersey, Newark, got back to the hospital. There they had the patient ready for surgery. As a Hispanic male, about 56 years old, and whom I had admitted. Very nice man. And so that was just the beginning of a long night. And so we started the surgery. They had opened him up and we came in with the heart, and I was with the doctor still, and I had to assist on the surgery. And we connected the heart, heart is there, cold. And when we unclamped the vessels and the blood began to flow through, we saw it pink up, and then we take the paddles, a magic moment, and we jumped the heart, and the heart started beating,
So that's interesting.
It was amazing.
That the heart has no electrical charge, and the paddle stimulates the electrical charge.
That's correct. And so the surgery was a tremendous success until we had to close. The guy was a small man, maybe about 5'6", and the heart was too big, and we could not close the chest. We could not close the chest at all. And we worked on it for hours. Every time we tried to bring the chest closer together, the heart would stop beating. And I remember the nurse who was the transplant coordinator, and she was up there crying, and everybody was crying. And,
because it means the guy is going to die.
Yeah, until we gave up. And what did we do in the operating room? We look at the clock and say, well, what time are we going to call? Its time of death is what time is on the clock. So it was one of those.
So the heart was working, but the chest could not be closed.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you could do to kind of bandage your heart. Well, I guess you can't do that. You got to keep you close that.
Yeah, well, we tried for hours. We tried, and every time we tried to close it, So, but by the next day,
I wonder if they couldn't have taken some of the ribs out and have a plate.
I guess they thought of everything, but by that time the heart was weakening, So when the next morning, the real heart surgery residents came in, and they were very upset that, they were not on that case. Some of them had never been on the heart transplant case before, but I got to do that experience and got to see the the glories of it and the tragedy, the glory of success and the agony of defeat there. But and then went over to Ohio, was recruited to Ohio. It was my intention to go to Ohio. I wanted to stay around in New Jersey. That seemed to be a good place. A lot of West Indians in East Orange.
At one point, you were in Delaware, Sam.
Yeah, well, in between. June was teaching at the University of Delaware, and so when Kwame was born, she would take him to the babysitter at 6 o'clock. He was a member of the church that went to a Filipino family, and she would drive a car to the train station, hop the train, go to Delaware. Her car was in Delaware at the train station. She'd drive to the university, drive back to the train station, park her car, get on the train, and get back oftentimes after 6 o'clock. And so I went through that difficult time. And so by the time we went to Ohio, started practicing in Ohio, she was able to stay home with the kids and so forth. So that was it.
Interesting. So
the rest of that is the rest of the story.
Yes. Any final thoughts on development and family and how all of these challenges that we overcame as children of parents of modest means, but a great Christian faith, great parental virtue, disciplined, faith-driven, hardworking, honest parents. What are the value systems that made for the successes we had, the way you can outline them, and what is the message for coming generations based on what we've been able to accomplish and contribute to humanity?
Well, you said it all in that summary, actually. But there's a verse in Matthew that says that Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in his synagogues, proclaiming the good news, and healing all manner of diseases. Teaching, proclaiming, and healing. And this is how I have always been and always want to be, and I, by God's grace, always will be. We come from a family of teachers. You've taught, I've taught, and the others have taught in various ways. Lawson is a very solid Bible teacher up there in Long Island. He sends us the sermons every Sunday, which we appreciate. And the good news, always proclaiming the good news. We live in a time when, a time of the pandemic where many people challenge in the department of hope. They feel that we're all going to die, that there's some grand conspiracy, to depopulate us and to kill us and so forth. But we're not all going to die. Some will die. Got to make sure that it's not us and our loved ones. And we do that by taking advantage of the science that is available to us and stop, spreading falsehoods and so forth. So people have become very barbaric. It's been disappointing to see America have that turn where the lowest common denominator. But still, the hope is that, all the things that we have done and all those who have gone before us have done, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And we have to continue doing the best we can, proclaiming the good news of development, proclaiming. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And we can only hope that we have inculcated in our children the same values that have been inculcated, that was inculcated in us. And in wherever we are planted, in whichever corner of God's vineyard that we're in, that we will bloom and that we will encourage, inspire, and set the tone and set the example of what there is to come. We live in a time where in our nation, we're going through difficult times economically. The spirit, the moral fiber of our nation is greatly stressed. So we continue to as Jesse Jackson would say, Brother Jesse would say, we keep hope alive. We look at what Marcus Garvey, what he accomplished 100 years ago. We look at all the great ones in the Caribbean and in the United States and elsewhere. Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, and so many heroes around the world who are fighting against oppression. And like Bob Marley, we say we've got to liberate our minds from mental slavery. Free up our minds from mental slavery. Only ourselves can free up our minds. That's where we are right now. So I'm very thankful for my family, the gift of, that what we've been bestowed, our heritage, and we want to leave a legacy. I'm thankful for my wife, June. I'm thankful for Edith and Dominica and Kaylan coming up smartly. For your children and for the other children of the family, the Christian family far and wide. So we continue to live in hope. We continue to exert ourselves because we know a better time is coming. And it's always an interview to a great privilege to review those things and to, although it seems like we're scratching the surface on all the things that we could talk about, but we are thankful, always thankful in whatever circumstance we are therewith to be content.
Yes, and Sam, I also want to take this moment to thank all those on Dominica, including the government of Dominica at the time, which we've criticized, but which we have supported also in the development mission when you were stricken on December 1st, 2018 in that terrible accident when your life hung in the balance. And the government and opposition, civil society, folks here, folks in Martinique, Mark Frampton, Cecil Joseph, Roosevelt Skerritt, Lennox Linton, Joshua Francis, Levin Pascal, Dr. Dale Dangleman, folks rallied together.
Dr. Hazel Schillingford.
Hazel Ricketts Schillingford. Yes.
Yeah. Commanded the hospital and made things happen.
Yeah, saved your life.
Yeah.
And I never forget the young lady from St. Joseph whose aunt Sino was our caretaker when you were little, was working for Amtrak and got me a ticket to that Saturday evening, Sunday morning to, I think, take the train to New York and then take the plane that Sunday night to Martinique. And I think I must have taken it Monday morning. And I arrived in Martinique, I think. So you arrived on Sunday, I arrived on Monday. And I remember shaving you in your bed, and that was, it reminded me of the days when I used to shave Daddy, And we thought you'd never walk again. And, here you are with Mom at 92 and Esther and Hildreth, and all of us, we give thanks to Almighty God for his deliverance. And maybe
I believe I left the body. I could see myself, as they say, it's a near-death experience. Saw myself and went into that zone. There was absolutely no fear at all. I didn't see relatives telling me, come, come, come. I didn't see Jesus in flowing robes or St. Peter at the gate, But one distinct thought I had was La Salette Church, where I had gone with Mom on many occasions as a child on pilgrimage in the truck early in the morning, 4 o'clock. La Salette, where I was a candidate for the United Workers' Party in the upcoming general election. La Salette, where there's a winding road coming down through the cemetery to the coastal road going to Soufrière. I saw that cemetery in my mind, and I heard that same announcement that you described earlier on. We've been asked to announce the death of Dr. Samuel Christian, age 62, of Point Michel, and left to mourning his loss. And I thought to myself that, this is it. I mean, wow. I mean, I would have loved to see my loved ones, and spend more time with them, every one of them by name. But, if that's it, I mean, that's it. I was ready for whatever the great beyond. And just something said, well, okay, all right, go back. And I didn't recall much, but I had all these tubes. They had operated on me. They had operated on my belly in Dominica, looking for blood, and there was none. It was sort of the right thing to do, actually. And when I got to Martinique, they operated me and brought the bones together because I had an open book fracture and was bleeding heavily into my belly and my back. And, I began coming around. So first time I was fully alert was when you were shaving me. Before that, I guess I was heavily drugged and unconscious most
Do
of
you
the time.
remember when I came to the hospital with Mark Frampton?
Yes. And taking the pictures and so forth. But before that, I was mostly in a fog and so forth. But by the grace of God, God has delivered me and God has preserved me. So we give thanks to the Most High. And we expect great things as we continue to give him glory.
Yes, indeed. Yes, Sam, I totally agree with you. Life is but a vapor. And glory be to God. So let's close tonight, Sam, with the prayer that our parents taught us. In our little bed we lie, Heavenly Father.
Father, hear my cry.
Right.
Lord, protect me through this night and keep me safe through morning light. For Christ's sake. Amen.
Thank you very much, Sam. This is going to be a wonderful interview. I'm going to send this up now to the transcriptionist. You should get it momentarily. Have a blessed evening, and I'll touch base with you tomorrow. Love you, Sam.
God bless you. Love to all.
Love to all.